There's a little girl sitting alone in the biggest airport in the state, and she hasn't moved in 47 minutes. Not to get water, not to use the bathroom, not to ask anyone for help. She's 8 years old. There's a bruise along her left cheekbone, the color of a storm cloud. And every time a stranger walks too close, she pulls her knees tighter to her chest and makes herself smaller, like she's spent a long time practicing how to disappear. Nobody stops. Nobody kneels down. Nobody asks. And then he walks in. 6'3", 230 pounds of scar tissue and silence. A leather vest stitched with a skull wrapped in iron chains, boots that hit the terminal floor like thunder finds a roof. The kind of man that makes airport security straighten up and mothers pull their children closer without knowing exactly why. He sees the girl in 3 seconds flat, and he doesn't keep walking. What happens next? In the middle of a blizzard, in a terminal full of frightened strangers, under the eyes of people who've already decided who he is, will crack something open that none of them were prepared for. This is the story of Rhett Callow. This is the story of Lena Holloway. And this is the story of what it means to stay when every instinct in a broken world tells you to walk away. Stay with me all the way to the end, because this one doesn't go where you think it's going. If this story hits you somewhere real, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now let's go. The storm came in from the northwest without apology. By 4 in the afternoon, the sky over Richmond had gone the color of a bruise, that particular shade of gray-green that old farmers recognize and pilots fear, the kind of sky that doesn't negotiate. By 4:30, the first flight started dropping off the departure boards at Richmond International Airport, the little orange delayed indicators flickering on one after another like dominoes tipping in slow motion. By 5 o'clock, the terminal had become something else entirely. No longer a place of motion and departure, but a holding pen, a waiting room for lives interrupted, hundreds of people suddenly with nowhere to go and no idea how long they'd be standing still. The heating system was fighting a losing battle. The air near the floor-to-ceiling windows had gone cold and sharp, carrying the particular bite of winter concrete and recycled terminal air. Outside, sleet hammered the tarmac in sheets. The planes sat motionless on the apron like patient animals, their wing lights blinking slow and red through the gray curtain of weather. Inside, the sounds layered on top of each other, rolling luggage wheels on polished floors, a baby somewhere near Gate C crying the long, exhausted cry of a child well past her limit, the mechanical chime of the PA system announcing delays in a voice so calm it felt like mockery, the low murmur of 200 conversations happening simultaneously at half volume, people performing patience they didn't feel. Rhett Callow had been awake for 31 hours. He didn't calculate it. He didn't track time that way anymore. But his body knew. The way a body knows things, the mind prefers to ignore. There was a specific texture to exhaustion past a certain point, a kind of cellular heaviness that turned his joints to wet concrete and put a thin, persistent hum behind his eyes. He'd ridden from Knoxville in weather that had no business being ridden in, the kind of cold that worked its way through 3 layers of clothing and settled into old injury sites like it owned them. The left knee where shrapnel had kissed the bone in Kandahar, the shoulder where a rotation cuff had been rebuilt by a VA surgeon with steady hands and limited supplies, the 2 ribs on the right side that had never quite healed straight after a rollover in 19 that he didn't talk about. He'd handed the bike off to the prospect who'd driven up from the Richmond chapter to collect it, and he was supposed to be on the 7:15 to Nashville, which was now showing as delayed until further notice, which in airport language meant nobody actually knew anything, and they were hoping you'd stop asking. He didn't mind waiting. He was good at waiting. He'd spent enough of his life in positions where waiting was the only option that it had stopped feeling like a punishment and started feeling like a state of being. He found a section of wall near a structural pillar at the far end of the terminal, away from the main congregation of stranded travelers, and he put his back against it and let himself breathe. He had a paper cup of coffee from the kiosk near Gate A that had gone lukewarm sometime in the last 20 minutes. He held it in both hands anyway, for the residual warmth, and watched the terminal the way he watched most spaces. Not paranoid, not tactical, just aware. Old habit. The kind of habit that kept you alive long enough to develop other habits. That was when he saw her. She was tucked into the narrow space between the pillar and a row of plastic seats, wedged in so precisely that she was visible only from certain angles, and only if you were paying the kind of attention most people in airports weren't paying. A small child, maybe 7 or 8, knees pulled tight to her chest, arms wrapped around her shins, her face tilted down so that the curtain of her dark hair fell forward and blocked her expression. She was wearing a coat that was slightly too big for her. A girl's winter coat, purple with a white stripe, the kind that had been bought with room to grow into. A small backpack sat against the pillar beside her, its cartoon elephant keychain swinging faintly in the climate-controlled air current. Rhett looked at her for a full 10 seconds before he looked around for an adult. Nobody was looking at her. Nobody was heading toward her. The nearby gate seats were occupied by a collection of strangers in the specific posture of people retreating into their phones and their own exhaustion, each one sealed inside their own private weather. A woman in business attire was on a call, walking small, tight circles near the window. 2 college-age kids had claimed a section of floor and were sharing earbuds, eyes closed. An older man in a Cardinals hat was asleep with his mouth open, a magazine folded over his face. The girl had been there long enough that she'd become furniture to them, part of the terminal landscape. He watched for another minute. Nobody came. Nobody glanced over. Nobody checked. Rhett drained the rest of his cold coffee, set the cup on the edge of a trash receptacle, and pushed off the wall. He moved slowly. He was conscious of how he moved in spaces like this, conscious of his size, conscious of the vest, conscious of the way strangers' eyes tracked a man who looked like he did when he moved through civilian environments. He didn't rush, and he didn't skulk. He walked with the measured pace of a man who wasn't trying to sneak up on anyone, which was a specific kind of walk, a walk that required actual thought when you were built like he was and dressed like he was. He stopped about 6 feet away from her. "Hey," he said. His voice was low, not loud, the kind of voice that didn't carry past 2 people. "You doing okay over there?" She went still, the way prey goes still. He didn't move closer. He watched her breathe. He could see it, the small, quick movement of her shoulders. She was scared. She was trying to decide if he was a threat before she'd even looked at him. "I'm not going to come any closer," he said. "I'm just checking. You've been sitting there a while." Slowly, her head came up. Dark eyes, red-rimmed at the edges. The bruise was the first thing he registered and the thing he had to work hardest not to react to. It sat along her left cheekbone like a thumbprint pressed in purple and yellow. The old injury yellowness at the edges suggesting it was 2 or 3 days old, and the fresh purpling at the center suggesting something that had happened more recently on top of it. 2 separate incidents, or one very bad one that had been added to. His jaw tightened, and he let it tighten and then let it go. The second thing he registered was that she was evaluating him, carefully, with the specific calibrated wariness of a child who had learned that evaluation was a survival skill. "I'm okay," she said. Her voice was small, but she didn't look away. "Okay," Rhett said. He didn't push it. He took a step back and half-turned, giving her his profile instead of his full attention, which was a thing he'd learned from watching how you approached a frightened animal. You didn't face them square on. You gave them an angle, gave them a direction to run if they needed to. "There's a storm. Flights are all backed up. You waiting for someone?" A pause. Then, "My grandma is coming to get me. She called. She's—" The girl stopped. She said an hour ago she was an hour away. Rhett did the math on that without making it visible on his face. An hour from an hour ago, in a storm that had been getting progressively worse, on roads that were almost certainly icing over. That timeline was generous at best. "Okay," he said again. "What's your name?" Another pause. Shorter this time. "Lena." "Lena." He nodded like the name was reasonable, which it was. "I'm Rhett. I'm waiting on a flight to Nashville that's not going anywhere tonight either." He glanced toward the departures board without making a performance of it. "You want me to go away? I'll go away. No hard feelings." She looked at him for a long moment. The bruise on her cheek caught the fluorescent terminal light, and he hated whoever had put it there with a quiet, bone-deep hatred that had nothing theatrical about it. "You can stay there," she said, meaning 6 feet away, "if you want." "All right," Rhett said. He moved to the wall on the other side of the pillar and put his back against it, mirroring his previous position, and settled in. He pulled out his phone and looked at it. He wasn't reading anything on it, but it gave her something to look at other than him looking at her, and that was the point. 3 minutes passed. Maybe 4.
"Why do you have a skull on your jacket?" Lena asked. He looked up. She was watching him with a focused, direct attention that children deployed without strategy. She just wanted to know, so she asked. "It's a patch," Rhett said. "My club, Iron Pyre MC. That's our symbol." "What's a club?" "Group of people who ride motorcycles together. Like, He thought about how to say it in terms that would land. Like a family, kind of, but louder. She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to her face, but it moved through the neighborhood of her expression, and that was enough. "Do you live in Richmond?" she asked. "No, Knoxville, just passing through." "Why?" "Brotherhood business." He said it without elaboration, because there wasn't elaboration appropriate for an 8-year-old, and she seemed to understand that an answer had been given even if it wasn't detailed. She nodded, filing it away, and looked back toward the terminal entrance the way she'd been looking every few minutes, watching for the grandmother who was now somewhere between here and where she'd started, on roads gone treacherous in the dark. The PA system chimed again. "All departing flights are temporarily suspended pending weather assessment. The airport is working to provide updates as conditions allow. We apologize for the inconvenience." The woman on her phone nearby let out a sharp exhale. The college kids opened their eyes. The man in the Cardinals hat didn't stir. Lena's hands, Rhett noticed, had tightened on her shins. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. But the first hour passed in increments. Rhett stayed where he was, against the wall, far enough that she had to raise her voice slightly to talk to him and close enough that she could. She didn't talk constantly. She talked in bursts, questions separated by silences, the way kids did when they were processing something too big for their vocabulary. He answered what he answered and left the rest alone. He bought a bottle of water from the vending machine down the corridor and set it on the floor halfway between them, equidistant, not a gift so much as an availability. She picked it up after 7 minutes. Small things. They added up. He learned, in pieces, that her name was Lena Holloway, that she was 8 3/4, that she lived in Charlottesville with her mother whose name she didn't volunteer, and whom she didn't mention again after that single reference. She was supposed to be spending the weekend at her grandmother's house in Richmond. Her grandmother's name was May, and Lena said it the way you said the name of something solid, the way you said floor or door, something you could put weight on. She'd been at the airport alone for almost 90 minutes. A woman in an airline uniform had checked on her twice in the first 30 minutes, and then stopped checking, overwhelmed presumably by the scale of the delay and the 100 other problems it had generated. Nobody else had stopped. Rhett had seen it, because he'd been watching. He'd watched person after person walk past the small girl wedged against the pillar. Some of them glanced over. None of them paused. There was a calculus that happened, he understood, in public spaces, a kind of collective assumption that someone else was handling it, that the child wasn't as alone as she appeared, that intervention was someone else's job. The calculus had a name in psychology, but Rhett hadn't learned it in a classroom. He'd learned it in the way you learn things in combat, by watching the moment when a group of people failed to act and understanding exactly what that failure cost. He didn't judge it harshly, he just didn't participate in it. He knew the moment things shifted in the terminal because he'd been tracking it peripherally, the way the background awareness of a space that had been operating around him tipped from ignoring to noticing. It started with a woman in her 40s in a down parka who passed them and then stopped and looked back, her gaze moving from Lena to Rhett and back to Lena with a calcification of expression that he recognized immediately. It was the look of a decision being made, not a complicated decision, not a considered one, but the kind of snap moral judgment that filled in the blanks with whatever narrative was most available. He watched her pull out her phone. He didn't move. He didn't change his posture. He stayed where he was, back against the wall, hands loose at his sides. And he let it happen because he knew what was coming, and he also knew that the only thing that would make it worse was if he acted like a man who had something to hide. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" he asked Lena,
because the question was real and because keeping her talking was a better use of the next few minutes than silence. She thought about it seriously. A vet, she said, for animals, not people. She paused. People are meaner to doctors. That's probably accurate, Rhett said. My teacher says I should be a lawyer, Lena continued, because I argue good. Argue well. She looked at him sideways. Are you going to correct my grammar? Apparently not, Rhett said. This time the almost smile made it further. It touched the corner of her mouth and stayed there for 2 or 3 seconds before retreating. The bruise on her cheek moved with it, and his eyes went to it without permission, and he pulled them back. The woman in the down parka was talking to someone in a blue airport uniform 40 feet away, gesturing in their direction with the specific emphasis of a person presenting evidence. The airport employee, Cho, young, maybe 23, with the particular expression of someone trained to deal with situations and now being presented with one, looked over. Rhett met his gaze steadily and looked away first, not because he was backing down, but because making the kid feel threatened wasn't going to help anyone. Your grandma, May, Rhett said. She know you like animals? She has a cat named Gerald, Lena said. Gerald is mean to everyone except me. Smart cat. She says Gerald has good judgment. Lena tilted her head. I don't know if cats have judgment. Jury's out, Rhett agreed. The airport employee was approaching. Rhett watched him come in his peripheral vision and kept his focus on Lena, because she was the one who mattered here, and because looking at the approaching employee with anything other than complete calm was a choice that had a cost. Excuse me. The young man stopped a few feet away, his posture carrying the uncertain authority of someone who'd been told there was a problem but hadn't yet determined its shape. His name tag said Derek. Are you with this little girl? No, Rhett said. She's waiting for her grandmother. She's been alone for about 90 minutes. Her grandmother is on the way but got delayed by the weather. He said it plainly, without defensiveness, just information transfer. Her name's Lena Holloway. Her grandmother's name is May. Derek looked at Lena. Is that right, sweetheart? Is this man bothering you? Lena looked at Derek with an expression that contained more evaluation than most adults would have expected from an 8-year-old. No, she said. He's sitting over there. He got me water. Derek's eyes went to the water bottle in Lena's hands and back to Rhett, working through something internally that Rhett recognized as the collision between the training answer and the evident reality. The training answer said, separate the child from the unknown adult. The evident reality was a child who was calm and speaking voluntarily and holding a water bottle and demonstrating no distress in the man's presence. The collision produced a particular kind of hesitation. I can move if it's easier, Rhett offered. I'll stay inside of her, just farther away. She shouldn't be alone in a terminal this size. Derek looked at him again. The vest, the patches, the size, the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to the edge of his jaw. The general presentation of a man who looked like exactly what he was, which was not a man who belonged in an airport's approved aesthetic of normalized citizenship. Then he looked at Lena again. Are you okay? He asked her directly. I was better before my flight got canceled, Lena said, with the specific honesty of a child who hadn't yet learned the social grace of white lies. Now I'm mostly waiting. Derek stood there for another moment. Then he nodded at Rhett with the micro-nod of a man who has made a decision he isn't entirely comfortable with and is going to live with anyway, and walked back toward the main terminal area. The woman in the down parka watched him go and then watched Rhett with the specific frustration of a person who had filed a report and not received the response they felt it warranted. Rhett didn't look at her. He looked at Lena. You doing okay? He asked. I don't like when people talk about me like I'm not there, she said. No, Rhett said. Neither do I. She looked at him again with that calibrating look, and something in its quality had shifted slightly. Not warm, not trusting, but fractionally less defended, like a gauge moving a single mark in a direction. The water was good, she said. Thank you. Sure, Rhett said. The second hour was harder. The storm intensified around 6:30, the sleet converting to full snow, heavy and wet and driven sideways by a wind that found every gap in the terminal's insulation and pushed through it with the patient persistence of winter. The temperature inside had dropped by 3 or 4 degrees, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to be uncomfortable, enough that people had stopped taking their coats off and started pulling them tighter. Lena's grandmother had called twice. The first call had been optimistic. 30 minutes out, the roads were bad but passable. The second call, 20 minutes later, had been less optimistic. May's voice, even through the phone speaker from 6 feet away, carried the specific strain of an older woman pushing a car through conditions that the car was not designed for, on roads that had gone past manageable into something else. After the second call, Lena sat for a while without speaking. Rhett let her. Then she said quietly, "She's not going to make it, is she?" It wasn't really a question. It was the sound of a child working through a conclusion she'd already reached, checking it against the presence of an adult to see if the adult would lie to her. Rhett thought about May, somewhere on an iced-over Virginia highway in the dark, and about the specific mathematics of distance and weather. "Probably not tonight," he said, "but she's going to keep trying." Lena nodded, a small, precise nod, and looked at her hands. "My mom was supposed to put me on the plane," she said after a moment. "She didn't come." Rhett absorbed that without reacting to it. He filed it next to the bruise, next to the coat that was slightly too big, next to the 90 minutes of sitting alone while strangers walked past, and he let it sit where it landed without picking it up and examining it in front of her. "The airline people put me through security," Lena continued. "The lady said she was going to watch me until Gran came, and then—" She shrugged, a small, angular movement. "She got busy, I think." "Yeah," Rhett said. "I didn't want to ask anyone else." Her voice was neutral, reporting. "Some people—" She stopped, started again. "Not everyone is—" "I know," Rhett said. She looked at him. "How do you know you know?" He thought about that for a moment. It was a real question, the kind kids asked when they were genuinely trying to understand rather than trying to score a point. He thought about Afghanistan and about the specific expression on the faces of kids in villages that had been visited by too many different groups of armed strangers, each one arriving with their own version of help that wasn't, each one leaving something worse behind. He thought about what it did to a person, what it did to a child, to learn too early that the people who came were not safe, even when they came with the language of safety. "I've seen what happens when people can't trust the ones who are supposed to help them," he said. "I know what it looks like afterward." Lena looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "You were in the war," she said. Not a question either. "Yeah. My teacher's husband was in the war. She searched for the word. He doesn't sleep good. A lot of us don't. Do you?" "Some nights," Rhett said. "Some nights are better than others." She accepted this with the same gravity she'd accepted everything else, tucking it away somewhere. Then she said, "You're not what I thought you were going to be." "What did you think?" She looked at his vest, at the skull, at the stitched letters Iron Pyre MC, at the patches below that she couldn't read from where she was sitting. "Scary," she said plainly. "You look scary." "I am scary," Rhett said. "Sometimes? To the right people. Am I the right people?" "No," he said. "You're not." She looked at him for another beat. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a battered paperback, something with a horse on the cover, and opened it in her lap. Not a dismissal, a decision. She'd done her assessment and rendered her verdict and was now simply occupying the same space with him the way you occupied space with something that had proven itself neutral. Rhett leaned his head back against the pillar and closed his eyes for 30 seconds. Just 30. Long enough to let the hum behind his eyes settle slightly. When he opened them, there were 3 people looking at him from different positions in the terminal. The woman in the down parka, who had found a new vantage point, a middle-aged man in a business suit who had stopped pretending to read his phone, a young couple with a stroller who had positioned themselves in a way that might have been coincidental and wasn't. He met each set of eyes in turn, briefly, and looked away. Not aggressive, not apologetic, just present. This was the thing about being what he was, looking the way he looked, in spaces that weren't built for people like him, The surveillance was constant, and the surveillance was amateur, which made it both more and less manageable than the professional kind. These people weren't dangerous to him, but they were building a narrative collectively in real time, and the narrative had a shape he recognized, and there was nothing he could do to change it except continue being exactly what he was and wait for the story to catch up. He was used to waiting. The panic attack started without announcement. Lena had been reading or performing the act of reading. Rhett had noticed that her eyes had stopped moving across the page about 10 minutes before, that she'd gone still in the specific way of a person who was no longer in the room, even though her body was. He'd registered it and filed it without intervening, because sometimes people needed to be somewhere else for a minute, and the only thing that made it worse was being called back before they were ready. But then her breathing changed. It went short and high and quick, the kind of breathing that was eating air without processing it, and her hands closed around the paperback hard enough to wrinkle the cover. Her shoulders went up and her chin went down, and she was disappearing into herself, into whatever place the panic had found, and the reading was gone, and the terminal was gone, and she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere smaller and more dangerous and built entirely out of whatever it was that had put that bruise on her cheekbone and left her alone in an airport for 90 minutes while her mother didn't come. Rhett moved toward her slowly, still giving her the angle, not approaching head-on. He stopped at arm's length and crouched down so that he was below her eye level rather than above it, which changed the geometry of the moment in a way that mattered. Lena. Quiet. Just her name, just an anchor. Her eyes were fixed on something that wasn't in the terminal. Her breathing had gone ragged. "Hey, look at the floor!" He kept his voice low and even, no urgency in it, because urgency would make it worse. "Just look at the floor right in front of you. Tell me what color it is." A beat. 2 beats. Her eyes moved fractionally downward. "Gray," she whispered. "Yeah, gray. What does it feel like?" "Cold." Her voice was barely audible. "Hard." "It's solid," Rhett said. "It's not going anywhere. You're sitting on something solid. You feel that?" A long pause. Her breathing was still wrong, but the quality of the wrongness was changing. The ragged peaks were flattening slightly, the intervals between them stretching. "I feel it," she said. "Good. 4 counts in." He breathed it with her, not making a show of it, just modeling it the way he'd had it modeled for him a long time ago in a VA waiting room by a counselor who'd understood that the technique worked better when it was shared than when it was instructed. "Hold it. 4 counts out." It took 4 cycles. Not 2, not 1. 4, the first 3 ragged and imperfect, and the 4th one almost clean. He watched her come back from wherever she'd gone, watched the focus return to her eyes and the rigidity leave her shoulders and the grip on the paperback relax degree by degree until she was just holding a book again instead of holding on. When she was back, he moved away again. Same measured distance, same position against the wall. He didn't make anything of it. "Sorry," Lena said after a minute. "Nothing to be sorry for," Rhett said. "Does that—" She stopped, reconsidered. "Do you do that? That breathing thing? For yourself?" He thought about honesty versus comfort and decided honesty was what she was asking for. "Yeah," he said. "I learned it from a guy who learned it over there, brought it home with me." "Does it work?" "Better than the alternative," Rhett said, which was as much as he was going to give on that particular subject. She nodded slowly, processing. Then she looked at him with an expression that had something new in it, some fresh quality that was different from evaluation and different from wariness, and he recognized it after a moment as the specific look of a child who has just realized that an adult has a wound and is deciding how to respond to that information. "I'm glad you sat down," she said. It hit him somewhere he didn't expect. He let it land and let it settle, and he looked out toward the snow-covered tarmac beyond the terminal windows, and he said, "Yeah, me too, kid." That was when the second airport employee arrived. Not Derek. This one was older, late 40s, heavy-set, with the particular bearing of someone who'd worked their way up from part-time to a position with some actual authority, someone who'd developed a specific relationship to that authority and its proper exercise. His name tag read Hayes, and he'd clearly been briefed, because he arrived already calibrated to a specific version of the situation, the version that had been reported by the woman in the down parka, which was not the same version as the version that had actually occurred. Sir. Hayes stopped at a distance that was just slightly too close to be comfortable, just slightly inside the margin that would require Rhett to either step back or hold his ground. It was a deliberate placement. Rhett recognized it because he'd been trained to use exactly the same technique for exactly the same reasons. I'm going to need you to move away from this child. Rhett didn't step back. He also didn't step forward. He stayed precisely where he was, his hands visible, his posture open, and he looked at Hayes with the particular calm of a man who had been in enough genuinely dangerous situations that this situation, by comparison, registered as merely uncomfortable. I'm aware of how this looks, Rhett said. I've been watching this kid for the last 2 hours because she was alone and nobody else was doing it. Her grandmother is May Holloway. She's been delayed by the weather. The girl's been trying to reach her. He kept his voice level, informational. I'm not touching her. I'm not trying to take her anywhere. I'm sitting on a wall. I understand that, Hayes said, and his tone made clear that he did not find the understanding dispositive. But we've received a complaint, and our protocol requires— Your protocol, Lena said from behind Rhett, with the specific clarity of an 8-year-old who had decided to weigh in, is dumb. Hayes blinked, shifted his gaze to the girl. Sweetheart, I'm not your sweetheart, Lena said. My name is Lena Holloway. He's not doing anything. He's just sitting there. He got me water, and he taught me to breathe. She paused. Also, he's been awake for a really long time, and you're making his day worse. Hayes stared at her for a moment with the expression of a man whose script had not included this variation. Then he looked back at Rhett, recalibrating. Sir, I still need to ask you to— I'll move, Rhett said. I'll stay inside of her, but I'll move back from the pillar. That work? It was not a capitulation, and it was not a confrontation. It was a practical offer that gave Hayes the appearance of having achieved something while keeping the actual situation intact. Rhett had made enough of these offers in enough of these situations to have calibrated the formulation carefully. Hayes hesitated, looking for the catch, and didn't find one. I'm going to need your ID, Hayes said. Rhett reached into the inside pocket of his vest and produced his wallet and handed it over with the specific, unhurried deliberateness of a man demonstrating that he had nothing to conceal. Hayes looked at the driver's license for a long moment, looked at Rhett, looked at the license again. Veteran? He'd clocked something, possibly the bearing, possibly the way Rhett stood, possibly something in the face that combat put on people and that other people sometimes recognized without being able to name. Yeah, Rhett said. Hayes handed the wallet back. His posture had shifted, not dramatically, but in the micro degrees that the body expressed what the professional demeanor wouldn't. Stay where I can see you, he said, which was a different instruction than move away, and they both knew it. Roger that, Rhett said. Hayes walked away. The woman in the down parka, still watching from her new position, looked from Hayes to Rhett with an expression that communicated dissatisfaction with the outcome. Rhett moved back to the wall, further from Lena's pillar now, 15 feet instead of 6, but still in the line of sight she'd established, still in the same section of the terminal. He put his back against the wall and took a breath. Lena was watching him from her spot. You're good at that, she said. At what? Not getting mad, she said, even when people are being dumb. He thought about the first year after he'd gotten back, when he'd been considerably less good at it, when the anger had been closer to the surface and the threshold for it had been considerably lower, and there had been 3 specific incidents in 3 specific locations that he'd spent a lot of time working through in a lot of different ways before arriving at the version of himself that stood in this terminal right now. I wasn't always, he said. She nodded, accepting this without judgment, the way she accepted most things, like a person who understood that people had histories and that histories had weight. Outside, the snow intensified. The departures board had gone quiet. No new information, no new delays, just the existing delays stretching forward into the indefinite future of the night. The terminal had settled into the particular collective exhaustion of a space full of people who had accepted that they were not going anywhere for a while, and were now simply enduring. A family had set up camp near Gate B. 2 kids, a father, a mountain of carry-on luggage, and the kids were making the particular noise of children who had used up their patience approximately an hour ago and were now operating on pure metabolic discontent. An older couple sat side by side in the gate chairs, not talking, just sitting in the particular companionable silence of people who had been together long enough that presence was its own language. Rhett watched all of it with the half-attention of a man who was mostly focused on one specific section of the terminal, the section containing a small girl with a bruised cheek and a horse book and a breathing technique she'd just learned, and a grandmother who was somewhere out in the dark on an iced highway trying to get to her. At 7:45, Lena's phone rang. He could hear May's voice from 15 feet away, and what he heard in it was not optimism. He watched Lena's face go through several things in rapid sequence: hope, calculation, the micro-collapse of something that had been held up with effort. She talked for 3 minutes, her own voice careful and controlled in the specific way of a child performing composure for an adult who needed them to be okay. When she hung up, she sat with the phone in her hands for a moment without moving. Then she looked up at Rhett. "She's stuck on 64, she said. "There's an accident. They're not letting cars through." Rhett nodded slowly. "She said she'll get a hotel and come in the morning," Lena continued. Her voice was steady. "When the roads are better." "Okay," Rhett said. "The airport has a—" She looked at her phone, reading from wherever May had given her the information. "A family services room for kids who are stranded. They have cots." "That's good," Rhett said. Lena looked at him for a moment. "Will you—" She stopped. The question had cost her something, starting it. She tried again. "The lady said the room is at the other end of the terminal. I don't—" Another stop. "I'll walk with you," Rhett said, "as far as they let me." She looked at him with those red-rimmed eyes, and something in them was different now. Not the cautious evaluation of the first hour, not the measured neutrality of the second. Something that was more specific and more fragile and that he recognized, because he'd seen it in a specific kind of context that had nothing to do with airports and everything to do with what it felt like when a person who had learned not to trust anything found themselves in the presence of something that hadn't broken that lesson yet. She stood up, tucking the horse book into her backpack, and pulled the backpack onto her shoulders. "Rhett," she said. "Yeah." "Don't walk scary." She glanced at a nearby family who was watching them. "You know, like—" She squared her own small shoulders and put on an unconsciously accurate impression of his particular manner of moving through space. He almost laughed. He didn't, because laughing felt too big for the moment, but something loosened in his chest that had been tight since Knoxville, since before Knoxville, since a long time before Knoxville. "I'll do my best," he said. They walked together toward the far end of the terminal, the big scarred man in the iron skull vest and the small girl with the bruised cheek and the too big coat, and the terminal watched them go with its various expressions of judgment and suspicion and the particular civic discomfort of people confronted with something that didn't fit their available categories. He didn't look at any of them. He looked at the doors ahead and at the small figure walking beside him, her backpack bouncing slightly with each step, her chin up, her eyes forward, moving through the space with the careful dignity of someone who had decided to trust something and was going to see it through regardless of what it cost. The family services room was at Gate H, which was at the very end of the terminal, and the door was staffed by an airport employee who clocked them coming from 20 feet away and whose expression shifted through several configurations in quick succession. Recognition of the child, recognition of the vest, calculation, and then the particular deliberative pause of a person deciding whether to intervene. Rhett stopped 10 feet short of the door. "This is as far as I go," he said to Lena. She stopped and looked up at him. Then she looked at the door and back at him with the expression of a child doing a calculation she hadn't planned to have to do. "The room has people in it," Rhett said. "Other kids probably. People whose job it is to be there. You'll be all right." "I know," she said. But she didn't move. She stood with her backpack straps in her hands and looked at him. And what was in her face was something that had no name in her vocabulary yet, but would have one eventually. The specific wordless understanding that safety was not a permanent state, but a thing that could be found and lost and found again.
and that sometimes it came in the shape you expected, and sometimes it came in the shape of a stranger with a skull on his chest who sat 15 feet away and got you water and taught you to breathe. "Will you be here?" she asked. "In the morning, when Gran comes." He thought about the Nashville flight. He thought about the iron pyre business that had taken him to Knoxville and was waiting for his return. He thought about the prospect who'd picked up his bike and was probably back at the chapter by now, and about the text he'd need to send, and about Cage and Drummer and whoever else was running point on the Nashville situation that now had no point to run. "Yeah," he said, "I'll be here." She looked at him for one more moment, reading him the way she'd been reading him all evening, with that precise, unchildlike assessment of a person who could not afford to be wrong. Then she nodded, a single definitive nod, and turned toward the door. She was 3 steps away when she turned back. "Rhett?" "Yeah. Thank you." She said it directly, clearly, without decoration. "For not walking." He stood there for a moment with the words landing where they landed, and he said, "Sleep well, kid," which was not the thing he would have said if he'd had time to think about what to say, but which turned out to be the right thing anyway. She went through the door.
He stood in the empty corridor for a while, the distant noise of the terminal behind him, the snow pressing white and heavy against the window at the end of the hall. His shoulder ached. His knee ached. The hum behind his eyes was back. He turned and walked back toward his section of wall. He was passing Gate F when the terminal entrance doors banged open with the particular violence of someone pushing through them in a hurry. And a woman came in from the night, mid-30s, dark-haired, a coat thrown on over what looked like work clothes, her face carrying the specific combination of relief and terror of someone who has been driving in a panic and has just arrived somewhere and doesn't yet know if it's in time. She was scanning the terminal in rapid sweeps, her eyes moving quickly over the crowds, looking for something specific, and he could see in the tension of her body and the set of her jaw that she was running on the particular fuel of a person who has been afraid for hours and is still afraid now. Her eyes moved across him and past him, and then came back. She stopped. He stopped. She looked at him, at the vest, at the patches, at the skull, and her face went through something complicated and fast that he couldn't read from 20 feet away. And then she took a step toward him, and then another, and her expression was doing something that he hadn't expected, something that was not fear, and was not anger, and was not the suspicion he'd been marinating in all evening. It was recognition. She looked at him the way you looked at something you hadn't seen in a very long time. Something you'd carried with you without knowing you were carrying it. Something that existed in a category so specific and so sealed that encountering it in an unexpected place produced a kind of rupture in the normal functioning of the face. He did not know her. He was certain of that. And yet, she stopped 5 feet away. Her chest was heaving slightly from the cold and the rush and whatever she'd been holding together for the last several hours. She looked at him with those eyes that knew him from somewhere he couldn't locate, and she said quietly, like a person saying something that had been unsaid for a long time, "It was you." The terminal roared and hummed around them. The sleet hammered the glass. Somewhere behind him, down the corridor, a small girl was settling onto a cot in a room full of strangers, breathing in 4 counts and out 4 counts, holding on to something she'd found tonight and hadn't expected. And Rhett Callow stood in the middle of a storm and looked at a woman who knew his face from a place he couldn't name, and for the first time all evening, he did not know what came next. Her name came to him in pieces. Not all at once. Not the way memory worked in movies, where a single trigger unlocked everything in a clean, cinematic cascade. It came the way real memory came, the kind of memory that had been compressed under years of weight into something dense and unrecognizable, a thing you carried without knowing what it was until the right pressure cracked it open, and out came not a full picture, but a fragment, and then another fragment, and then the slow, vertiginous process of watching the fragments arrange themselves into something you recognized. A courthouse. November. The particular gray of a mid-Atlantic winter morning that was indistinguishable from 100 other mid-Atlantic winter mornings, except that this one had a specific sound. Low voices, the scuff of dress shoes on marble floors, the distant mechanical clunk of a heavy door being operated by a bailiff who'd operated it 10,000 times before and would operate it 10,000 times again. He'd been there on club business that he wasn't going to think about right now. He'd been waiting in the corridor outside courtroom 4 on the third floor of the Henrico County Courthouse for a man who needed escorting out of a situation that had gotten complicated, which was the kind of errand that Rhett had been running for Iron Pyre at that stage of his time with the club. The kind that didn't have a clean name and didn't leave paperwork. He'd been leaning against the wall near the water fountain when he'd heard it. Not loud. That was the thing. Not a scene, not a confrontation, just a sound that was quiet and wrong. The particular sound of a person trying very hard not to fall apart in a public corridor and losing that particular battle by degrees. A woman, sitting on a bench against the wall of the corridor, bent forward with her elbows on her knees and her hands pressed flat against her face, and the sound coming through her hands was the sound of someone who had been holding something enormous together for a long time and had just run out of the particular strength that holding enormous things required. He'd been 6 feet away. No one else in the corridor except a man in a suit at the far end who was deep in his phone and radiating the particular obliviousness of someone who had decided the sound wasn't his problem. Rhett had stayed where he was for 30 seconds. Then he'd sat down on the bench, not close, not touching, just present, the way you sat down near something that needed company rather than intervention. He hadn't said anything. She hadn't either, for a while. He'd been there when the bailiff had come out of courtroom 4 to call her back in for the continuation of whatever proceeding had sent her out here in the first place, and she'd straightened up and pressed her palms against her face one last time, and stood up with the specific bearing of a person reconstituting themselves around a core of pure will, and she'd gone back through the door without looking at him. He'd never known her name. He'd thought about her twice in 12 years, maybe 3 times, in the way you thought about things that had no resolution and therefore no closure, a thought that completed nothing, answered nothing, went nowhere. He looked at her now. She was 35, maybe 36. The dark hair was shorter than it had been, or maybe it had been up that day in the courthouse. He couldn't remember. There were things in her face that 12 years put in a face. Not damage exactly, not age exactly, but the specific sediment of time and difficulty that accumulated around the eyes and the mouth of a person who had lived a life that hadn't been gentle. And she was looking at him like he was a ghost she had decided to believe in. "Henrico County Courthouse," he said, 12 years ago. Something moved across her face. Relief, he thought, and something sharper than relief. Something that was almost pain. "I didn't think you'd remember," she said. "I didn't," Rhett said. "Not until just now." She stood there for a moment, and the terminal churned around them. The noise of 100 stranded conversations, the PA system cycling through its automated apologies, the snow pressing white and obliterating against the tall windows. She looked like a woman who had driven here through a blizzard on the specific energy of fear and was now standing on the other side of that drive with the fear's object no longer present and the energy with nowhere to go. "Lena," Rhett said. "Your daughter." "My niece," the woman said. Her voice was steadier now, the initial rupture of recognition resolving into something more contained. "My sister's... she's my..." She stopped, reconsidered the syntax of what she was about to say. "I'm her guardian, legally since..." Another stop. "Since about 8 months ago." He absorbed that. He didn't ask the question it implied, because the question was written all over her face already in the specific way that questions about absent parents were always written on the faces of the people who'd stepped in for them, and asking it would accomplish nothing except making her say a thing she was clearly not yet in a position to say in a public terminal to a stranger. "She's in the family services room," Rhett said, "down at gate 8. She's okay. She was alone for a while before I found her, but she's okay." The woman closed her eyes for a single second. When she opened them, they were bright. "I drove from Charlottesville," she said. "May called me when she got stuck on 64. She exhaled sharply. "The roads are a disaster. I almost..." She shook her head, not finishing that sentence. "I almost didn't make it." "But you did," Rhett said. "But I did." She looked at him with those knowing eyes, the ones that had done the impossible thing of recognizing him across 12 years in a terminal full of strangers. "I'm Claire," she said. "Claire Holloway." "Rhett Callow." "I know," she said. I looked you up after the courthouse. She must have read something in his face because she added quickly, Not, I wasn't, I just wanted to know who you were. You sat with me for 45 minutes while my life was falling apart, and you never said a word, and then you just disappeared, and She looked down at the terminal floor and then back up. You ride with Iron Pyre. For 17 years, Rhett said. I know what Iron Pyre is, she said, and her voice carried something in it that he couldn't immediately decode. Not fear, not judgment, something more ambivalent than either. I looked them up too. He held that. He understood what she'd have found if she'd looked, 12 years ago or now. The club's reputation, its history, the specific kind of news coverage that outlaw motorcycle clubs received, which was comprehensive in its documentation of the things that were easiest to document and silent on the things that didn't fit the available narrative. He understood what the vest looked like to someone with access to a search engine and a memory of a stranger who'd been kind to her. You still drove here, he said. May told me there was a man with a motorcycle patch staying with Lena. Claire looked at him steadily. I knew who it was before I walked through those doors. Rhett looked at her for a long moment. There was something almost impossible about this. The specific mathematics of the universe required to route two people from a courthouse corridor in Henrico County to a terminal in the middle of a blizzard in the company of an 8-year-old girl 12 years later, and he didn't know what to do with the impossibility of it, so he set it aside, the way he set aside the things he couldn't process immediately, in a place where they could wait. She's a brave kid, he said. Claire's expression shifted. She has to be. The flatness of it said everything about what that sentence cost. What? They walked to Gate H together. Not side by side exactly. There was a foot or so between them, the distance of strangers who had agreed to walk in the same direction, and the conversation was intermittent, filling in the spaces between decisions. Claire had come from work, she said. She was a nurse. She'd been on a 12-hour shift when May had called, and she'd changed in the car, more or less, which explained the coat over the scrubs. Lena had been in her care for 8 months. The transition had not been simple. None of the language she used to describe it was specific, but the specificness of the redaction said plenty. Rhett told her about the afternoon in as much detail as he thought was useful. The 90 minutes alone, the panic attack, the breathing exercise, the airport staff, Hayes with his ID check, and his professional uncertainty. He left out the woman in the down parka because it wasn't useful, and he left out the 3 hours of sitting against a wall being watched by a terminal full of strangers deciding what he was, because that also wasn't useful. She told you about the vet thing? Claire said. Said she wanted to be a vet. For animals. She's been saying that since she was 5. A pause. Something worked through Claire's expression that was too quick to name. She used to also want to be a ballerina. She stopped mentioning that one about a year ago. He didn't ask why. He understood why. The Gate H Family Services room had a window in the door, and through it they could see a space that had been organized for exactly this situation. Cots along the walls, a table with sandwiches and plastic wrap, and juice boxes. An airline employee who looked approximately 22 sitting near the door with the expression of a person who had volunteered for this post before understanding what it entailed. 3 other children besides Lena, in various configurations of awake and almost asleep. Lena was on a cot near the far wall, sitting cross-legged with the horse book open on her knees. She was not reading it. She was watching the door with the specific, focused patience of someone who had made a decision to trust something and was waiting to see if it would hold. When the door opened and Claire stepped through, Lena was off the cot in under 2 seconds. She didn't cry. She crossed the room in 8 steps and went into Claire's arms and held on with the particular intensity of a child who had been holding everything together in a high-volume public space and had finally reached the person with whom holding together was optional. Claire held her and said nothing and let her be whatever she needed to be, which was, for about 30 seconds, something very young and very frightened and very relieved. Rhett stayed in the doorway. After the 30 seconds, Lena pulled back and looked over Claire's shoulder and found him immediately, the way she'd been finding him all evening, directly, without searching. You stayed, she said. Said I would, Rhett said. She looked at him with the grave, complete attention that was so specific to her, And then she looked at Claire, and he watched her notice the slight widening of the eyes, the rapid, almost invisible recalibration, that Claire already knew him, or knew something, that there was a layer to this moment that was not being fully stated. Kids noticed everything. He'd always known that. He'd just forgotten how comprehensively true it was. "You know each other," Lena said. It was not a question. Claire looked at Rhett over Lena's head with an expression that asked a question of its own. How much? How? What's the right answer? He gave her nothing back, because it was her story to tell or not tell, and the version she told would be the version Lena lived with. "We met a long time ago," Claire said, "when you were very small." Lena processed this with the slightly narrowed eyes of a person filing something away for future examination. Then she looked back at Rhett. "The breathing thing works," she told him, with the directness of someone closing a loop. "I did it again after you left." "Good," Rhett said. 4 and 4, she said. 4 and 4, he agreed. By 9 o'clock, the terminal had reached its particular late storm equilibrium. The volume of noise had dropped. The energy of grievance and disruption had settled into the lower-grade endurance mode of a long inconvenience, and the people who were going to find somewhere to lie down had largely found somewhere. The family services room had been officially checked by Hayes, who had looked at the configuration of Claire, Lena, and Rhett in the doorway, and made a visible decision to update his assessment of the situation without saying so aloud. He'd asked Rhett for his ID again. Rhett had given it again. Hayes had copied something down in a small notebook and given it back. "You're welcome to use the gate seating," Hayes told him, with the specific phrasing of a man extending an invitation that was technically also a containment strategy. "Appreciate it," Rhett said. He'd settled into a row of seats at Gate H that faced the family services room, which had glass panels beside the door that showed the interior. He could see Lena's cot from where he sat. He could see Claire in the chair pulled up beside it, Lena's hand in hers. He could see the gentle, regular movement of the child's breathing settling into sleep. He sat with his forearms on his knees and his coffee. Another paper cup, this one hot. Claire had gotten it from somewhere. And he watched the terminal and the window and the snow beyond the glass, and he let himself exist in the specific peace of having done the only thing that made sense and having it turn out, so far, not to have been a catastrophe. His phone had 8 messages. 4 from the Iron Pyre. Nashville chapter. From Cage, mostly, the Nashville president, who had a communication style that translated consistently across mediums as "I need you here and you are not here, and I would like an explanation." 2 from Drummer, the Iron Pyre Knoxville VP, which were more measured but carried the same underlying architecture. 1 from the prospect who'd taken his bike, which was a single-word question mark. And 1 from a number he didn't immediately recognize, which turned out to be from a brother called Hex, who was writing with the Richmond chapter, and whose message read, "Heard you're grounded at RIC. You need something, brother. We're 10 minutes. He looked at the Hex message for a long time. He typed back, "Situation is handled. Appreciate it." Hex came back 30 seconds later. "Cage is asking questions." Rhett put the phone in his pocket. Cage would be asking questions. That was accurate. Rhett was supposed to have been in Nashville 6 hours ago for a conversation that involved the kind of business Iron Pyre didn't put in writing and didn't discuss in airport terminals, and his absence had a cost that was not going to decrease with time. The Nashville thing had been building for 3 months, a boundary dispute with a club called the Drowned Saints that operated out of central Tennessee and had been, methodically and then less methodically, pushing into Iron Pyre territory in ways that started as incidental and had stopped being incidental around 6 weeks ago when a Pyre associate in Murfreesboro had ended up in a hospital with 2 broken ribs and a dislocated jaw after a run-in with Drowned Saints members in a parking structure. The Nashville meeting was about resolution, the kind of resolution that required Rhett specifically, because Rhett was the person that Cage trusted to walk into a room with dangerous men and come out the other side without having made the situation worse, which was a specific skill and not a widely distributed one. He was not in Nashville. He was in a Richmond airport in a blizzard, sitting outside a room where a small girl was finally sleeping. He understood the cost of that clearly, and he chose it clearly, and he sat with the clarity of the choice without self-congratulation or performance. Just the simple, flat weight of having looked at a situation and decided what mattered. His phone buzzed again. Cage. He let it ring. That. Claire came out of the family services room at 9:45. She moved quietly, pulling the door almost shut behind her, and she looked at Rhett in the gate seat with an expression that was trying to figure out how to be. There was gratitude in it, obvious and genuine, and something more complicated underneath the gratitude. The particular complexity of a person who had spent 8 months building a protected space for a damaged child and was now standing in front of evidence that the child had needed protection in a context where the person who'd provided it was someone the world would not have assigned to that role. She sat down 2 seats away with her coffee and looked at the family services room window for a moment. "She's asleep," she said. "Yeah. She hasn't slept straight through since—" Claire stopped, started again at a different entry point. "She has nightmares. Most nights." Rhett said nothing. He waited. "What she said to you," Claire said, "about not hitting her. She told me she said that to you." He absorbed this carefully. He'd known, from the moment the words came out of Lena's mouth, what they meant and where they came from. And he'd known it was not something to address directly in the moment, and he'd filed it in the same sealed space as the bruise and the too big coat and the mother who hadn't come to the airport. "She was scared," Rhett said. "She said it. I told her she was okay. She believed me. That's the whole of it." "You didn't—" Claire looked at him with a careful, measuring look that was cousin to the one Lena deployed. "Most people would have asked questions." "Not my questions to ask," Rhett said. Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, a gesture that was identical to the one Rhett had been making all evening, the seeking of warmth where warmth was available. She looked at the terminal floor for a moment, then out the window at the snow. "Her mother," she said, and stopped. He waited. "My sister," Claire said. "Mara, she—" The word arrangement shifted several times in the few seconds before she continued. "She's not— Mara's been in a situation for the last 3 years that I didn't see clearly enough until it was—" Another reconfiguration. "There was someone in Mara's life who—" "You don't have to tell me," Rhett said. "I know." She looked at him directly. "But I want to." A pause. "I don't know why I want to. I don't talk about it to anyone. I've been handling all of it alone for 8 months, and I haven't told anyone." She shook her head slightly, a small, private gesture. "There's something about you." He understood what she meant. He'd heard versions of it before, from people who'd talked to him in waiting rooms and hallways and the specific quiet spaces that crisis created, people who needed to say something to someone who was simultaneously present and outside the normal architecture of their life, someone who would hear it and then leave, someone for whom the telling had no consequences beyond the telling itself. "The man in her life," Rhett said, giving her a direction without requiring her to find it herself. "He hit her," Claire said, flat and clean, the way you said a thing when you'd been not saying it for long enough that the saying of it had become its own small violence. "For a long time." And then he started. She stopped, looked at the gate window. Lena was there, in the house. Not always. Mara kept her away as much as she could. She tried. But sometimes— Claire's jaw tightened. "The bruise on her face is from 2 weeks ago. She told the school she fell." Rhett's hands had gone still on the coffee cup. He let them be still. He breathed evenly, which took something. "Mara is in a program," Claire continued. "Voluntary. She's been there 3 weeks. She's—" A long pause. "I don't know what she is. I don't know what happens on the other side of this. I know that Lena is with me, legally, for now, and I'm trying to build something stable, and I'm doing it from scratch on a nurse's salary in a 2-bedroom apartment, and she has nightmares, and I have nightmares, and some days I just—" She stopped herself, pressed her lips together, looked out the window. "Some days you just," Rhett said, without finishing it, because the unfinished version was more accurate than anything he could put after it. "Yeah." She let out a breath that had weight to it. "Some days I just—" They sat with that for a moment. The terminal breathed around them, its late-night machinery.
the distant rumble of a luggage cart, the particular frequency of the fluorescent lights, the muffled ongoing weather beyond the glass. "The courthouse," Claire said eventually. I was trying to get an emergency custody hearing for Lena, the first time I tried." She looked at her hands. "They denied it. Not enough evidence. They told me to document, come back, give it time." Her voice was careful and controlled, and the carefulness and control were exactly what the anger sounded like when it had been compressed into something that could be carried in a public space. "I'd been documenting for a year. I came back 4 times. The 4th time they granted it." She looked up. "That's 8 months ago." Rhett thought about the woman on the courthouse bench, the sound she'd been making, the suit-wearing man at the end of the corridor who'd decided the sound wasn't his problem. "I don't remember sitting with you," he said. "Not then. It came back when I saw you." "I know," Claire said. "I could tell." A small, private, almost smile, brief as a match lit in a dark room. "You never looked at me once the whole 45 minutes. You just sat there, like a wall between me and the rest of the world." "I was waiting for someone," Rhett said. "I know that too," she said. "You're not the type to—" "I could tell you weren't there for me specifically. You just—" She paused. "You just didn't leave." He thought about that, about the specific quality of staying, about the difference between presence and intervention, the thing that the courthouse had been and the thing that this terminal had been. The same essential thing, the same essential refusal to calculate the cost of staying against the cost of walking, the same stubborn animal knowledge that a frightened person deserved a wall between them and whatever was on the other side. "It's what my mother called it," he said, before he decided to say it. "She called it keeping watch. She said every frightened thing deserves someone keeping watch." Claire looked at him. "She sounds like she was a good woman." "She was," Rhett said. "She had to be. My father was—" He stopped. 12 years of that sentence not being finished in front of strangers held the rest of it back by pure reflex. She had to be very good to compensate for him. Claire nodded slowly. She understood that sentence and its architecture. He could see the understanding in her face, the specific recognition of a person who had spent time in the proximity of that particular gravity and had built themselves around the hole it left. They sat in silence for a moment that was different from the silence of strangers. It had a texture to it, an agreed-upon quality, 2 people who had told each other something that lived in a sealed room and had briefly, deliberately opened the room without making a performance of the opening. Then Rhett's phone rang. Not a text. A call. Cage. He looked at the screen, thought about the Nashville situation, the drowned saints, the 3 months of escalation, the Murfreesboro associate with the broken ribs, the resolution that required him specifically, the room full of people waiting for him to walk into it. He answered. "I'm in Richmond," he said, without preamble. "Storm grounded everything. I'll be on the first flight out." Cage's voice came back even and contained, which was its most dangerous configuration. Cage at full volume was manageable. Cage quiet was the version that had preceded most of the worst outcomes Rhett had witnessed in 17 years of brotherhood. "The meeting was tonight, Rhett." "I know." "Drowned Saints had 2 men there. We had me and Drummer and an empty chair where you were supposed to be." "I know, Cage." "An empty chair sends a message," Cage said. "You understand what message it sends." "I understand," Rhett said. He looked at the family services room window, at the just visible outline of a small figure on a cot. "I had a situation." "What situation?" "A kid was alone in a terminal. No one else was handling it." The silence on the other end of the line was the specific silence of a man processing information that did not fit the categories in which he was currently operating. When Cage spoke again, his voice had shifted by a degree. Not softened. Cage didn't soften, but repositioned. "You blew a 3-month setup for a kid." "I did," Rhett said. Another silence. Longer this time. "Drummer's asking questions," Cage said. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that start with where and end with why." A pause. "There are people in this club, Rhett, who look at a missing sergeant-at-arms the night of a meeting with a rival club, and they don't think airport delays. They think something else. Rhett absorbed this. He had known it would come, had known it from the moment he'd settled against the wall at Gate A and decided he was staying, had known it the way you knew the consequences of a choice before you made it and made it anyway. The cost hadn't been invisible. He'd just chosen differently. "I'll talk to Drummer when I'm back," Rhett said. "You'll talk to Drummer tonight," Cage said. "He's 3 minutes from the airport. I already called him." Rhett looked at the family services room window, at Claire, sitting in the gate seat 2 chairs away, who had heard half a conversation and was watching him with the specific expression of someone who understood exactly what half of that conversation had been about. "All right," Rhett said. "All right," Cage echoed, and there was something in the word that closed more than the phone call, some larger clasp shutting on something neither of them was going to name. "Don't keep him waiting." The call ended. Rhett sat with the phone in his hands for a moment, looking at the screen. "You have to go," Claire said.
It was not a question. "Somebody's coming to meet me," Rhett said. "I won't leave the terminal." He looked at her. "You and Lena are going to be fine until morning. The room is secure. There's staff." "I know," Claire said. She was looking at him with that same expression, the one with layers, the one that was not simple. "You're going to go stand in front of someone who's angry with you." "He's not angry," Rhett said. "He's worried. It's different." "Is it better or worse?" He thought about it honestly. "Worse," he said. Claire looked at the family services room window for a moment, then back at him. "The thing in Nashville," she said carefully. "The thing you missed. I'm not going to talk about it." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking." She paused. Are you going to be okay?" The question sat in a specific place. Not the kind of question people asked reflexively, the social lubricant version of the question. The kind people asked when they intended to receive an honest answer and had enough structure in themselves to hold whatever the answer was. He thought about Drummer, who would be walking through the terminal doors in approximately 3 minutes, and about the conversation that was coming, and about what Cage had said about the kind of questions that were being asked, and about the drowned saints, and the empty chair, and the 3 months of work that had been compacted into one night and had now been displaced by a storm and a choice. "Yeah," he said. It was honest. Not comfortable, not clean, but honest. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she nodded with the precision of a person who has assessed an answer and found it adequate. "Thank you," she said. "For her, and for—" She gestured slightly at the terminal, at the space between them, at whatever it was they'd told each other that was going to live, sealed in this particular airport night for the rest of their lives. For the second time. "Don't mention it," Rhett said, meaning it the old way. The way it was meant before it became a courtesy phrase. The original instruction, this doesn't need to be mentioned because it exists in a space beyond mention. He stood up, and he was reaching for the leather vest's front zip when he heard the main terminal doors bang open at the far end of the corridor. Drummer came through them the way Drummer came through most things. Without preliminary, without announcement, with the specific density of movement that came from a man who had been built by things that had very little interest in his comfort. He was 6'1", broad through the shoulders in a way that had nothing to do with a gym, carrying the weight of a man in his mid-40s who had kept himself functional out of necessity rather than vanity. Iron Pirate, Knoxville. 5. Pea patch on his chest. A face that had been handsome once and now was something better. Specific, marked, honest, in the way that scars made a face honest, because scars didn't lie about what had happened. He saw Rhett from 30 feet away and didn't slow down. His eyes moved to Claire, a single, calibrated look that took in the scrubs, the proximity, the context of the gate seating, and then back to Rhett, and the look came back carrying more questions than it had left with. He stopped 2 feet away. "Brother," he said. His voice was low. "Drummer," Rhett said. A beat of silence between them. The specific silence of men who had ridden together through enough difficulty that silence had a vocabulary. Drummer looked at him the way a doctor looked at a wound, not for the surface presentation, but for what was underneath it, for the depth and the direction.
You're in one piece, Drummer said. Yeah. Cage thought. Drummer stopped. Edited. Cage had thoughts. What kind of thoughts? Drummer's eyes moved again to Claire, who had stood up and was standing with her coffee cup in the particular posture of a woman who was not going to be invisible on command, who had made the decision to be present in this space and was standing by it. Who is she? Drummer asked, directing the question at Rhett, but not looking away from Claire. Someone I helped, Rhett said. Twice now, apparently. Drummer took that in. His jaw moved slightly. He looked at Rhett again with the deep, practiced assessment of a man who had spent 22 years reading people in situations where reading them wrong had fatal consequences, and something in the reading settled, fractionally, into a different configuration. The kid, Drummer said, her niece, was alone in the terminal when I got here. How long? Close to 2 hours before I sat down. Drummer looked at him for another moment, then looked at the family services room window, at the faint illumination behind the glass panel, at the just visible shapes of cots and sleeping children. Something moved through his face that was too quick and too complicated to name, something that had nothing to do with Nashville and everything to do with something considerably older. Cage is going to have questions, Drummer said. I told him I'll answer them. It's not just Cage. Drummer's voice dropped another register. There are drowned saints moving into the conversation who are going to interpret tonight as weakness. And there are brothers in the chapter who are going to hear that their sergeant-at-arms blew off a critical meet, and they're going to come to their own conclusions. And some of those conclusions... He paused, choosing the words precisely, the way Drummer always chose words when words were the thing that mattered. Some of those conclusions are going to be hard to walk back. Rhett looked at him steadily. I know. You know, Drummer said. It wasn't agreement. It was the specific repetition of a man confirming that the understanding was real and not performative, that the person standing in front of him had genuinely calculated the cost. A kid, Rhett. A kid, Rhett said. Another silence. Drummer looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then at Rhett with an expression that was too old for anger and too honest for anything else. Your mom would have done the same thing, Drummer said finally. Quietly. The sentence arrived not as a compliment and not as an absolution. It arrived as what it was, which was an accurate statement about the specific inheritance that had built the man standing in front of him. The sentence hit something. Rhett let it hit and kept his face still. What happened in Nashville? He said. Drummer's expression shifted. Meeting happened. Cage held it. Drowned saints were represented by a man called Virgo. You know the name? I know it. Virgo made it clear that the territory question is not going to resolve itself conversationally. They want the 40 corridor between Nashville and Murfreesboro. They're not asking. What did Cage tell them? Cage told them Iron Pyre's position on the 40 corridor has not changed and will not change. A pause. He also told them that the full sergeant-at-arms would be at the follow-up in 48 hours. Rhett absorbed this. 48 hours. It was a window, narrow, but a window. Virgo accept that? He said. Virgo accepted it the way a man accepts a thing he intends to revisit, Drummer said. He's not a patient man, from what Cage read. But he's a careful one. He's not going to move without a reason, and right now we haven't given him a reason. He paused. Tonight could have been a reason. Cage contained it. I'll be in Nashville in the morning, Rhett said. Drummer nodded, a single slow movement. Then he looked again at Claire, and then at the family services room window. And there was something in his face in that moment, something visible and unguarded that was unusual on a face that was generally neither, that looked very much like recognition. Not of her specifically, of the situation, of the specific shape of it, a frightened child in a waiting room and a man who'd stopped. She okay? Drummer asked. The little girl? She is now, Rhett said. Drummer nodded again. He put his hand on Rhett's shoulder, a single beat of contact, the specific kind of contact between men who had been through enough together the touch required no context. And then he withdrew his hand and turned and looked at the terminal as a whole, at the storm-stranded humanity arranged across its seats and floors, and he said quietly, almost to himself, "It's the ones nobody else stops for." Rhett looked at him. "My daughter," Drummer said, still looking at the terminal. When she was 7. We were separated in a parking garage. Security thing, somebody set off an alarm, crowd panic. She went one way and I went another. She was on her own for 11 minutes. He paused. A woman stopped, some stranger, stood with her the whole 11 minutes. He let out a slow breath. I never got the woman's name. Never knew who she was. A pause. Katie talks about her still. He said it without looking at Rhett, directing the words into the terminal space between them, and Rhett understood that it was being said in a specific way. Not as a confidence, not as an intimacy, but as a ledger entry, a thing being added to an ongoing accounting that wasn't about tonight alone, but about something larger and longer. I'll be in Nashville, Rhett said again. First flight. I know you will, Drummer said. He turned and looked at Rhett directly. Cage is going to make you answer for the chair. That conversation is going to be what it's going to be, and you know Cage. I know Cage. What you don't know, Drummer said, is who Cage talked to between the meeting and calling you. The sentence landed with the specific weight of a sentence that was doing more work than its surface suggested. Rhett looked at Drummer and Drummer looked back, and in the space between their eyes was a question that Drummer was asking without asking it directly. And the question was about loyalty and about the specific fragility of the thing they'd built and maintained together over years, and whether one night's choice, however defensible, had cracked something in the structure that would not simply repair. Who did he talk to? Rhett said. Drummer looked at him for a long moment, and then, instead of answering, he looked at Claire one more time, at the nurse in the borrowed coat standing in the gate corridor outside the room where her niece slept, and his jaw tightened by 1 degree, and he said, Get some sleep, brother. You're going to need it. He turned and walked back toward the terminal entrance, his boots hitting the polished floor with the specific heavy rhythm of a man carrying more than the night required, and Rhett watched him go and thought about the sentence that hadn't been answered, and about Cage, and about the 48 hours that stood between him and Nashville, and he understood, with the clean, flat certainty of a man who had learned to read the weather of the organizations he belonged to, that the storm outside the terminal windows was not the only storm that had been building tonight. He turned back to Claire. She was watching him with the nurse's eyes, the assessing, professional calm of a woman who had spent years in rooms where things were worse than they looked, and had learned to read the specific quality of a person's stillness for what it meant about what was happening underneath. You're in trouble, she said. Not a question, not an accusation. Maybe, Rhett said. Because of tonight. Because of tonight, he confirmed. She looked at him steadily, and what was in her face was complicated and specific and had no easy translation, and she said quietly, I'm sorry. Don't be, Rhett said. He looked at the family services room window, at the sleeping child, at the specific and ordinary miracle of a small frightened person who had found her way to safety on a night designed to make safety impossible. Some things you don't get to calculate. Claire looked at him for a moment with something in her eyes that was older than the night. Rhett, she said. Yeah. There's something you should know. Her voice had changed quality. The bottom had dropped out of the carefulness, the management, the specific poise she'd been maintaining. She was looking at him the way Drummer had just been looking at the terminal. Not at the surface, but at what the surface was covering. About why May got the custody case finally. About the documentation, about what the police found when they went to Mara's house 8 months ago. He looked at her. The man who hurt Lena, Claire said. Her voice was very quiet, very level, the specific level of a voice that is level because the alternative is catastrophic. He's out. He pled down to a misdemeanor, served 60 days. She looked at the family services window. He's been calling Mara from a new number each time. A pause. The pause had a specific shape, the shape of something about to close around something. He knows where we live. The terminal hummed and breathed. The snow pressed white against the glass. The sleeping child breathed on the other side of the wall. And Rhett Callow sat very still with his coffee cup in his hands and looked at Claire Holloway and understood that the conversation he'd thought was ending had not ended at all. That the night, which he'd already calculated as the most expensive of recent memory, had just opened a room he hadn't known was there. And inside the room was a door.
And behind the door was the name, Daniel Fitch. Claire said it the way you said a name that had stopped being just a name. The way it became a specific weight, a specific shape of danger that lived in the body rather than the mind. Something you felt in the sternum and the back of the throat before the brain had finished processing the syllables. Rhett set his coffee cup down on the seat beside him. He set it down carefully with the specific deliberateness of a man making sure his hands had something neutral to do. "Tell me about him," he said. Claire looked at the family services room window for a moment, at the faint light behind the glass, at the sleeping child on the other side of the wall. Then she looked at Rhett with the expression of a person who has been carrying a specific weight alone for a specific amount of time and has reached the edge of what alone can hold. "He's 38, she said. "He was with Mara for 2 years. She met him after things were already—" She stopped, rerouted. "He was careful in the beginning. They're always careful in the beginning." "Yeah," Rhett said. "The first time the school called me, Lena had a bruise on her arm. A grip bruise. 4 fingers and a thumb, up near the shoulder. She said she'd fallen off her bike." Claire's voice had gone to the specific register of clinical detachment that people in medical professions developed for exactly these situations. The voice that allowed you to say terrible things without the terrible things destroying you in the saying. "I called Mara. Mara said I was overreacting, that it was complicated, that I didn't understand the whole picture." "How long ago?" 14 months. She paused. "The second call was the school counselor, not me. 3 months later, Lena had told a friend that she was scared to go home. The counselor called DCFS. DCFS investigated and found not enough. Mara was cooperative. The house was clean. Lena recanted. Rhett was very still. "Recanted," he said. "She's 8, Claire said, and the 2 words carried the entire weight of what it meant to be 8 years old and frightened and recanting. The impossible calculus of a child choosing between a terrifying truth and the home that was the only home she had. After that," Claire continued, "Mara started pulling away from me. Wouldn't answer calls, wouldn't let me visit. Fitch's work, probably. That's what they do. They isolate. I went to the courthouse the first time 9 months after the school counselor's call. 12 years ago, you were there for a client or something. I never asked. And I was there for Lena, and they turned me away." She exhaled. 4 attempts. 8 months ago, they finally granted emergency custody after Mara presented at an ER with a fractured cheekbone and told the attending physician that she'd walked into a door. The attending didn't believe her. He documented it correctly. That was the thing that finally moved it. "Where's Fitch now?" Rhett said. "Officially? He completed his sentence, 63 days of a 90-day misdemeanor conviction for domestic disturbance, which is what happens when prosecutors don't have a cooperative victim and the perpetrator has a lawyer who charges $400 an hour." The clinical voice had developed a hairline fracture in it. "He's back in Charlottesville. That's what I know. I know he's in Charlottesville because Mara told the program coordinator he'd been calling, and the coordinator told me, and I know he knows my address because—" She stopped. "Because why?" Rhett said. "Because 3 weeks ago I came home from a night shift and there was a scratch on my front door lock," Claire said. "The kind of scratch that a key makes when someone's using it in the dark, or in a hurry, or when the key is almost right but not quite." She looked at her hands. "I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was catastrophizing. I changed the locks the next morning." Rhett looked at her steadily. The terminal hummed. The snow was heavier now against the glass, the flakes fat and wet and driven sideways. The kind of snow that buried roads and grounded planes and kept frightened people stranded in airport terminals long after they'd planned to be somewhere safer. "Does he know she's here?" Rhett said. "Tonight. He knows Lena spends weekends with May." Claire's voice was careful. "Whether he knows about the airport, whether he's been... I don't know how closely he's tracking us. I don't know how far it's gone." She looked at him directly. "That's the honest answer. I don't know." Rhett sat with that for a moment. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. He thought about the scratch on the door lock, about the man who made it, about 63 days served for a fractured cheekbone, and whatever else hadn't made it into the documentation. about a child who'd said, "Please don't hit me. I'm already hurt," to a stranger in an airport terminal because that sentence had become a reflex. "You need to tell someone," Rhett said. "Law enforcement. A formal report." Claire's expression shifted. Not surprise. Something more tired than surprise. The expression of a person hearing a suggestion they've already heard and already know the specific shape of its inadequacy. "I filed a report about the lock," she said. "The responding officer he was professional. He told me to document any further incidents and contact them if the situation escalated." A pause. "He also told me that without evidence of a specific threat, there wasn't much they could do preemptively." "A scratch on a lock isn't evidence," Rhett said. Not skepticism. Just the architecture of the situation. The way a person said this is where we are without implying it was where they should be. "No," Claire said. "It isn't." Rhett looked at the family services room window again, at the sleeping child, at the too big coat folded over the end of the cot, at the horse book on the chair beside her, at the breathing. He could see it, the slow, regular movement of a small body finally, after too long, in the posture of genuine rest. Something settled in him. Not a decision exactly. It was too quiet for a decision, too simple. More like the recognition of something that had been true already and was only now being acknowledged. "I'm going to give you a number," he said. "Man named Hex. He's with the Richmond chapter of my club. You text that number if anything changes, if you see something wrong, if someone's outside, if Lena tells you something that concerns you. Anything, day or night." Claire looked at him with a complicated expression. "Rhett, I'm not asking you to do anything with it," he said. "I'm asking you to have it. That's all." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her processing it. The specific hesitation of a woman who had spent 8 months being careful, building something small and protected, who understood that the thing she was being offered came attached to a world that had its own complications and its own costs and its own version of danger. He watched her weigh it against the scratch on the door lock and the calling phone with the new number each time and the 63-day sentence for a fractured cheekbone, and he watched the weighing tip. "Okay," she said. He gave her Hex's number from memory. She put it in her phone without comment. Then his own phone buzzed. Not a call this time, a text. From a Richmond chapter number he didn't recognize, which meant it was either a prospect or someone patching in recently, and the message was 4 words: "Drowned Saints in Richmond." He read it twice. He read it the way you read a thing that changed the geometry of the room you were standing in. Not with disbelief, because disbelief was a luxury of people who hadn't spent 17 years learning how these situations moved, but with the specific flat assessment of a man recalculating a problem that had just acquired new variables. He texted back, "How many? Where?" The response came in under a minute. 3 bikes. Spotted near the airport perimeter road. Hex clocked them 20 minutes ago. No approach yet. 3 bikes. Near the airport. 20 minutes ago. Rhett stood up. Claire was watching him. She'd read the change in his body. She was a nurse. She read bodies the way other people read text, and what his body was saying right now was not ambiguous. "Something happened," she said. "Maybe," Rhett said. He was already texting Hex. "Where are you now?" Hex. "East parking structure, level 2, 2 brothers with me. You want company?" Rhett. "Stay put, don't approach. Eyes only for now." He looked at Claire. "Stay in the terminal. Don't go outside for any reason. Keep Lena in the family services room until morning." Claire stood up, her expression shifting from concern to something sharper. "What's happening?" "Probably nothing," Rhett said. "Could be coincidence." He said it without conviction because she deserved honesty and because both of them knew that 3 drowned saints' bikes near an airport where Rhett Callow was grounded after missing a meeting was not a geometry that could be read as coincidence without straining the definition of the word. "Rhett." "Stay inside," he said. "That's what matters. You and Lena stay inside." He walked toward the terminal entrance. Itan. The cold hit him like a deliberate act. Outside the automatic doors, the night had committed fully to winter. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees since he'd arrived, and the wet snow had gone dense and driving, horizontal in the wind gusts, the kind of precipitation that made the air thick and white and cut visibility to 30 feet. The walkway outside the terminal was empty except for the salted pavement and a single airline cart that had been abandoned near the curb and was developing a white cap. The road beyond the terminal loop was invisible in the snow. Rhett stood in the covered doorway overhang and let his eyes adjust and his skin adjust and his lungs adjust to the cold, and he texted Hex. "Visual on bikes?" Hex. "Lost them 10 minutes ago. They moved off the perimeter road heading south. Could be nothing. Could be reconnaissance." Reconnaissance. He thought about Virgo. About Cage's description. Not a patient man, but a careful one. About 3 months of territory escalation and 1 missed meeting and 48 hours before the follow-up. About what 3 bikes near a specific airport on a specific night could mean to a man like Virgo, who would know that Rhett was here because information moved in these circles, the way weather moved. Through systems, through pressure differentials, through the specific channels that had been established over years of conflict and negotiation. He thought about what Drummer had said. There are people in this club who are going to hear that their sergeant-at-arms blew off a critical meet, and they're going to come to their own conclusions. Not just inside the club. Outside it, too. A missed meeting read as weakness to the men on the other side of the table. A weakness had a specific utility. It was a place to apply pressure. And pressure could be applied in many forms, not all of them direct, not all of them loud. Sometimes pressure was 3 bikes circling an airport in a snowstorm, visible enough to be noticed, gone before anything concrete could be established. A message that said, "We know where you are." His phone rang. Hex. He answered. "Talk to me," Rhett said. 2 of the bikes went south like I said. Hex's voice was low, compressed. The specific compression of a man talking in a space where he didn't want to be heard. He was young, Hex, 26, 27, but he had the voice of someone who'd been in enough situations to have stripped the youth out of it. "Third one is still out here, east side near the rental car return, just sitting." "Single rider?" "Far as I can tell, hasn't moved in 8 minutes, hasn't approached anything, just sitting." "One man, stationary, while the other 2 moved." The stationary one was the eyes. The moving 2 were the options, positioned for flexibility, far enough apart that interdicting both simultaneously was not a one-person operation. "Stay away from the one sitting," Rhett said. "Don't engage, don't approach, don't let him see you're watching him. If he moves toward the terminal, you call me before you do anything." "And if he goes inside?" Rhett thought about the family services room, about the family services room employee who was 22 years old, and had not volunteered for anything close to what this situation had the potential to become. About a small girl asleep on a cot who had said, "Please don't hit me, I'm already hurt," and had meant it as a literal request based on literal experience. "He goes inside, I'm already inside," Rhett said. "Call me and stay on the perimeter." He went back through the automatic doors. The terminal had thinned out in the last hour. The particular churning energy of mass disruption had settled into the quieter texture of mass resignation. People horizontal, in gate chairs with coats pulled over them, heads on carry-on bags, the specific architecture of improvised sleep in public spaces. The lights had dimmed slightly in the public seating areas, the overhead fluorescence giving way to a warmer, lower wattage running light that turned the terminal amber and made it look like the inside of something that was trying very hard to seem comfortable. Rhett walked back to Gate H. Hayes was still on duty. He saw Hayes at the far end of the corridor talking to a younger colleague, and Hayes clocked him and held his gaze for a beat before looking back at his conversation, which was the kind of security presence that was both reassuring and not entirely reassuring because it was the unarmed administrative kind. He texted Cage. "Drowned Saints in Richmond. 3 bikes, airport perimeter. 1 still sitting east side." Cage came back in 40 seconds. "How sure?" Hex confirmed visual on bikes, colors visible. A longer pause. Then, "That's a message. Felt like one to me too." Cage. "They know you're there." Rhett. "Probably." Cage. "Sit tight, don't engage, I'm calling Nashville." He pocketed the phone and stood at the entrance to the Gate H corridor, looking down its length at the family services room door, and the amber light visible through the glass panel and the shape of Claire in the chair beside the cot. Awake, her back straight, her hands in her lap, watching the door the way a person watched a door when they knew something was wrong and didn't know what form it was going to take when it arrived. He walked down the corridor and stopped outside the family services room and knocked once, quietly. Claire was at the door in 3 seconds. She looked at his face, and she didn't ask the question. She already had the answer from the specific configuration of his expression, which was the expression of a man who had confirmed a thing he'd been hoping to be wrong about. "How bad?" she said, very quietly. "Unknown," he said. "Probably not bad. It might be posturing." He said the first part because it was true, and the second part because it was possible, and he owed her both. "I need you to stay in this room. Lock it if it has a lock. Don't open it for anyone except airport staff or me." "Does it have to do with—" She stopped. "With what you told your brother, Nashville." "Might be related?" Rhett said. "Might not be. I'm not sure yet." She looked at him, and what was in her face had moved beyond the complicated and had arrived somewhere cleaner and colder. "They followed you here," she said. "They may have tracked me here. Yeah." He held her gaze. "It's about the club. It's not about you." "I know it's not about me," Claire said, "but I'm in the same terminal." "Yes," Rhett said. "I know." A beat between them. The amber light through the glass panel showed Lena still asleep on the cot, the horse book on the chair beside her, the 22-year-old employee now dozing upright in their own chair near the door, with the specific unconscious dignity of a person who'd lost the fight against exhaustion. "Lock the door," Rhett said. "Don't open it unless it's me." He walked back toward the main terminal. Imbis. His phone went off at 11:47. Not Hex, not Cage. A number he didn't know, with a Richmond area code, and when he answered it, there was a pause before the voice. The specific length of pause that meant the person on the other end was making a decision about tone. "Callow." The voice was measured, deep, the voice of a man accustomed to the weight of his own words. "My name is Virgo." Rhett stopped walking. He was standing near the center of the terminal, between Gate D and Gate E, in the amber running light dimness of the late-night airport with its sleeping inhabitants spread around him, and the voice on the phone was a man who had been sitting outside in a snowstorm for the better part of an hour, watching an airport. "I know who you are," Rhett said. "Then you know tonight's meeting was important," Virgo said. "You know what an empty chair says." "I know what Cage told you about the follow-up," Rhett said. 48 hours. I'll be there." "The follow-up," Virgo said, and there was something in the word that was not agreement. "Assumes that the terms haven't shifted since tonight." A pause. "An empty chair shifts terms." "An airport in a blizzard shifts chairs," Rhett said. "The terms haven't changed." "You're confident of that." "I'm telling you that." A pause. Different from the first one, longer, with a different texture, the kind that came after something had been said that required actual consideration rather than performance. "You're sitting with a woman and a child," Virgo said. The temperature in Rhett's chest dropped by several degrees. He kept his voice completely level. "Strangers," he said. "Storm. Kid was alone." "I know who the woman is," Virgo said. The sentence landed with the precision of something that had been held back until the moment when it would do the most work. Rhett stood in the amber terminal light and breathed evenly and understood that the conversation had just changed its own architecture, that what he'd been treating as a negotiation about club business had revealed a second layer underneath, a layer that had different stakes and a different kind of threat embedded in it. "Say what you mean," Rhett said. His voice was flat. "Claire Holloway," Virgo said. "She's connected to a man named Fitch, Daniel Fitch. You know that name." He did not move. He did not allow anything to happen in his body that he did not authorize. He breathed in, he breathed out, and he said, "I know it." "Fitch runs distribution for us," Virgo said, "in Charlottesville. Has been for 2 years. A pause. "He's also been having some personal difficulties recently that have become complicated. His domestic situation attracted attention that's been inconvenient for our operations. He needs the child returned to his access." The words landed, and Rhett stood with them landing and understood, in the complete and specific way that understanding happened when a thing you had not known became a thing
you would never be able to unknow that Daniel Fitch was not simply a man who had hurt a woman and a child and served 63 days for it. He was an operative. He was protected. He was the reason 3 drowned saints' bikes had appeared on the perimeter road of an airport on the same night that Rhett had stopped to sit with a small girl who had a bruise on her cheek. And someone had told Virgo that Rhett was here. Someone had connected those dots before Rhett had. Someone inside Iron Pyre.
I'm going to say this one time, Rhett said, and his voice had gone to a register that was very quiet and very specific, the register that he used rarely, and that meant the performance was over, that whatever was underneath the performance was now speaking. The child has nothing to do with anything between Iron Pyre and the drowned saints. She is 8 years old, she sleeps in that terminal room tonight, and she goes home with her guardian tomorrow. And that is the end of it. You want to talk about the 40 corridor? You want to talk about Murfreesboro? You want to talk about terms? We talk in Nashville in 48 hours. That's the only conversation I'm having. A pause that stretched out long enough to contain several things. Then Virgo said, Fitch is a business relationship, Callow. The child is a personal matter. Business requires that personal matters stay personal. The child, Rhett said, and the word came out with something in it that had no name in the vocabulary of this conversation. Something that was older than clubs and territories and business relationships, is not anyone's personal matter. She's 8 years old. Men have made difficult choices about difficult situations before, Virgo said. Not this one, Rhett said. Another pause. When Virgo spoke again, the measured quality was still there, but something else was in it now. Not anger exactly, but the specific shift of a man who has made an assessment and revised it. A man who has been reading a situation as negotiable and has encountered a wall. You're sergeant-at-arms for 17 years, Virgo said. You understand how business works. You understand what happens when a man refuses to be practical. I understand what happens when a man refuses to be practical, Rhett said. I've been there, I'm still here. A long silence. 48 hours, Callow, Virgo said finally. After that, terms are what they are. The call ended. Rhett stood in the amber light of the terminal with his phone in his hand and the specific ringing silence that a certain kind of conversation left behind, the kind that had changed the shape of the world it occurred in without announcing the change, without ceremony, without anything except the clean, irreversible fact of 2 men having said what they meant and understood each other completely. Fitch ran distribution for the drowned saints. The drowned saints had sent 3 bikes to the airport. Someone inside Iron Pyre had told Virgo where Rhett was and connected him to Claire. He stood with those 3 facts arranged in front of him, and he thought about Drummer's sentence. You don't know who Cage talked to between the meeting and calling you. And about the specific phrasing of it, the specific direction of the warning, and he thought about the 47 minutes it had taken Drummer to arrive at the airport after Cage said he was 3 minutes away, and about the Richmond chapter number that had first alerted him to the drowned saints on the perimeter road, and how that number had come to be in circulation within the club's network tonight. He called Hex. The man outside, Rhett said when Hex picked up. Still there? Gone, Hex said. Moved out about 10 minutes ago. All 3 bikes gone now. Were you watching my position inside the terminal tonight? A pause. What do you mean? Were you watching me? My movements? Who I was talking to? A longer pause. The pause had the texture of something being carefully considered. I was watching the perimeter like you asked, Hex said. I wasn't watching you. Who was? Rhett. Who else from Richmond chapter is here tonight? Silence. Long enough to be an answer. Hex, Rhett said. I need to know who talked. I don't know what you're... Someone in Iron Pyre told Virgo I was here, Rhett said. Told him about the woman. Connected her to Fitch. That information didn't come from outside the club. He paused. Who has a relationship with the drowned saints that hasn't been disclosed. The silence on the other end was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of a man formulating a careful answer, but the silence of a man who had heard a thing he hadn't expected to hear and was now sitting inside the specific shock of it, the specific cold of a world rearranging itself around a revelation. There's a prospect, Hex said finally, very quietly. Name of Carver. He came up through Richmond 6 months ago. Nobody vouched him from the Knoxville side. A pause. He asked about you tonight. When I told him you were grounded at the airport, he asked who you were with. And you told him. I didn't. I said you'd found a kid alone, that there was a woman with her now. I didn't think. Hex's voice had gone ragged at the edges. Rhett, I didn't know. I know, Rhett said. It's not on you. He meant it. A prospect asking a natural question about a stranded brother was not a suspicious act until it was, and the until it was the entire problem with the inside job. Where's Carver now? I don't know, Hex said. He was here 2 hours ago. He's not answering his phone. Rhett stood very still. A prospect with an undisclosed relationship to the drowned saints, who had asked the right question at the right moment and gotten enough to pass upstream, and who was now not answering his phone on the same night that Virgo had called Rhett directly to tell him that Fitch needed access to the child. He needed Cage. He needed to call Cage and lay this out. The shape of it, the Carver question, the Fitch revelation, the Virgo call, the specific implication of all of it together. And then he needed to hear Cage's voice when he did it, because Cage's voice would tell him what Cage's words might not. And he needed to know, with the clean, flat certainty of a man whose life and the lives of two specific people in a family services room depended on the accuracy of his read, whether Cage was the leak or whether Cage was as blind to it as Rhett had been 20 minutes ago. He called Cage. Cage picked up on the second ring. Virgo called me, Rhett said, without preamble. Silence. The specific duration and quality of Cage's silence was information before any word was spoken. 2 seconds, 3, and in those seconds, Rhett heard something he had not expected to hear, which was surprise. Not the performance of surprise, not the careful construction of a man covering ground he already knew. The genuine, slightly ragged silence of a man encountering information that had not been in his possession. What did he say? Cage said. Rhett told him, all of it. Fitch, the distribution connection, the child, the demand, the specific architecture of the threat. He said it in sequence, without editorializing, watching his own voice for anything that might contaminate Cage's reaction before it landed. When he finished, Cage was quiet for a long time. Fitch, Cage said finally. We didn't know. No, Rhett said. We didn't. A drowned saints distribution man in Charlottesville, and we didn't know, Cage said. And the sentence was doing something that Cage's sentences rarely did, which was showing its underside. The specific raw quality of a man confronting the gap between what he'd known and what he should have known. Someone in our network should have had that. There's a prospect, Rhett said. Carver, Richmond chapter, 6 months, not vouched from Knoxville. Another silence. Different texture. Hex's people. Hex didn't know either. Carver played it clean until tonight. Rhett paused. He's gone now, not answering. I'm going to make calls, Cage said. His voice had gone to the specific register of a man shifting from processing to operating, the register that Rhett had heard in command structures before, in different contexts, the same universal frequency of a person who had finished being surprised and was now moving forward through the surprise toward what needed to be done next. The woman and the child, they stay in that terminal tonight. Understood, Rhett said. And Rhett, a pause. Virgo asking for access to that kid? That's not club business. That's not territory. That's something else. Yeah, Rhett said. You understand what I'm telling you, Cage said. I understand, Rhett said. The follow-up meeting in 48 hours is still happening, Cage said. But after tonight, the terms have changed. Not the way Virgo thinks they've changed. Another pause. We don't work with men who put children in the middle. The sentence landed where it landed, and Rhett stood in the amber terminal light and breathed, and for the first time in several hours, the thing in his chest that had been tight loosened by a single specific degree. Get some sleep, Cage said. First flight to Nashville. The call ended. He stood for a moment with the phone in his hand and the terminal sleeping around him, and the snow pressing white and relentless against the tall windows. And he thought about Lena on her cot with the horse book beside her, and Claire in the chair watching the door. And he thought about Daniel Fitch somewhere in the state of Virginia, connected to the drowned saints, making calls from new numbers, leaving scratches on door locks in the dark. He thought about the woman in the down parka who'd reported him to the airport employee 3 hours ago. He thought about Hayes and his ID check and his professional uncertainty, and about Derek with his training answers and his evident reality, and about all the machinery of the visible world grinding along with its protocols and its procedures and its forms and its documented incidents, while the thing that actually threatened a frightened child was moving through the infrastructure of a world that had no protocol for it, no form for it, no field in the documentation. He turned and walked back toward Gate H. He was 20 feet from the family services room door when he heard it. Not loud, not dramatic. The specific sound of a door that had not been fully latched, being opened by someone who was being careful. The barely audible catch and release of a latch mechanism. The fractional increase in ambient sound that meant a sealed space had briefly connected to the corridor, the family services room door. He was at it in 4 steps. He pushed it open and the 22-year-old employee startled awake in their chair, and Lena was sitting upright on her cot with her eyes wide and her breath short, staring at the emergency exit at the back of the room, which had its push bar handle depressed by approximately 1 inch, which was the amount it needed to be depressed to unlatch without opening, which was the amount it would be depressed by a person who had put their hand on the outside and then stopped. Claire was on her feet between the cot and the back wall, with her body angled between Lena and the emergency exit, her hands loose at her sides and her face doing something that was not panic, something colder and more specific than panic, the face of a woman who had spent 8 months being afraid of this specific moment and was now in it and had decided what she was going to do about it. The push bar handle was still depressed by 1 inch. Someone was standing on the other side of that door, in the snow and the dark, with their hand on the outside, and they had stopped. Rhett stepped inside the room, pulled the family services door closed behind him, and looked at the emergency exit with the complete, simple attention of a man who had arrived at the point where there was nothing left to calculate and only one thing left to do. The push bar handle moved. The emergency exit swung open and the night came in, all of it at once, the cold and the snow and the wet, dark smell of a winter storm, and the specific sound of wind finding a gap it hadn't had before. And behind the cold came a man. Not tall, medium height, medium build, the kind of physical presentation that was specifically designed to read as unremarkable, as unthreatening, as the kind of man your eyes moved past without registering. Late 30s, a jacket that was wet through at the shoulders from the snow. Dark eyes that had the particular flatness of a person who had spent considerable time arranging their face into something neutral and had gotten very good at it. Rhett knew the face without knowing it. He knew the type of face. He'd seen it in specific contexts, in the faces of men who had been very patient for a very long time about a very specific thing and had arrived at the end of their patience. Daniel Fitch looked at Claire first, then at Lena, then at Rhett. The sequence of the looking told everything. "Step back," Rhett said. His voice came out at the specific register. Not loud, not theatrical. The register that meant the thing underneath was fully engaged and fully controlled, and the control was the most dangerous part. Fitch didn't step back. He stood in the open doorway with the snow coming in around him and his hands loose at his sides, and he looked at Rhett with the flat-eyed assessment of a man taking a measurement. "This doesn't involve you," Fitch said. "Walk away," Rhett said. The 22-year-old employee was on their feet now, phone in hand, and Rhett said, without looking at them, "Call security, now." He heard the employee move, heard the door to the corridor bang open, heard running footsteps. Fitch glanced at the door and back to Rhett, his jaw tightened by a single degree. "I just want to talk to her," he said, meaning Claire, or Lena, or both. The ambiguity was its own specific violence. "No," Rhett said. "She's not your—" Rhett moved. Not fast. Precise. The distance between them was 8 feet, and he covered it in 2 steps, and he put himself in the doorway with his body filling the frame, one hand on each side of the door jamb, and Fitch stepped back into the snow instinctively because the alternative was contact, and contact with something Rhett's size moving at that specific velocity was not a choice a person made with their feet planted. They were outside now. Or Rhett was outside, in the door frame, the snow on his neck and shoulders, the family services room behind him. The emergency exit had a self-close mechanism, and it was pulling against his back. "You're going to walk away from this building," Rhett said. "Right now." Fitch had recovered his footing in the snow, 2 feet away. The flatness in his eyes had changed quality. There was something under the flatness now, a heat source, something that the flatness was containing. Virgo's not here," Rhett said. A beat. The snow came down between them like static. Then Fitch's hand moved toward his jacket, and Rhett's left hand closed on his wrist before the hand got where it was going, closed on it with the specific grip of a man who had spent 17 years and 2 combat tours developing a very precise understanding of how human wrist joints worked and what it took to make them stop functioning temporarily. And he turned the wrist in the direction it was not designed to turn, and Fitch made a sound that was short and sharp and involuntary, and the hand came away from the jacket empty. "Don't," Rhett said. Fitch was breathing hard now. The flatness in his eyes had cracked completely, and what was underneath it was not what Rhett had expected. Not rage, not the hot animal fury of a man whose control has been stripped. What was underneath it was something smaller and colder and more specific. Fear. The specific fear of a man who had built his power entirely in environments where he was the largest threat present and was now standing in an environment where he was not. Rhett held the wrist for another 3 seconds, then released it. Fitch stepped back. 1 step, 2. His right hand cradled his left wrist, and his breathing was the ragged, effortful breathing of adrenaline finding nowhere to go. From somewhere around the east corner of the building came a sound that Rhett felt before he heard it. A bass frequency, a mechanical roar, the specific acoustic signature of a Harley engine turning over in cold air, and then another, and then a third, and the 3 of them braided together into a sound that was not music, but was not entirely unlike music, the sound of iron and fire and controlled velocity. Hex. And whoever Hex had brought with him. 3 bikes came around the east corner of the terminal building, moving slow, running lights cutting through the snow in parallel beams, and they came to a stop in the service lane behind the terminal in a loose line, engines dropping to idle but not cutting, the rumble staying present in the wet air like a held note. Hex sat on the lead bike with his visor up and his eyes on Fitch, and the 2 brothers behind him sat the same way. Not moving, not speaking, just present, the engines idling, the specific grammar of the present saying everything that needed to be said without a word of it being spoken. Fitch looked at the 3 bikes, looked at Rhett, looked at the door behind Rhett, which had the family services room behind it, which had Claire and Lena behind it. The calculation he was doing was visible in his face. Rhett could read it the way you read a calculation you'd seen before, the rapid assessment of available force, available exit, available outcome. The wrist was throbbing. 3 bikes were idling. An airport security response was somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes away. "This isn't finished," Fitch said. "Yeah, it is," Rhett said. Fitch looked at him one more time with those cracked, flat eyes, and what was in the look was the specific look of a man filing something for later, storing a grievance in a compartment. And Rhett held the look without moving and let him file whatever he needed to file, because the filing was what happened when a man left, and the man needed to leave. Fitch turned and walked, away from the terminal, away from the bikes, into the snow. His figure went white at the edges and then disappeared around the far corner of the building. Rhett stood in the open doorway for 10 seconds after he was gone, breathing the cold air, feeling the snow on his face and neck, letting the specific physical texture of the outside exist for a moment before he went back in. Then he turned and let the door close behind him. The family services room was very quiet. The other children were awake now. 2 of them sitting upright on their cots with the wide, processing eyes of children who had been woken by urgency and didn't yet know what kind. Lena was standing behind Claire, one hand gripping the back of Claire's shirt at the waist, and her face was doing something that was not the panic attack from earlier. Something harder, something that had bypassed panic entirely and arrived at a place that was too old for her face, too experienced, too specific. She knew who had been at the door. She hadn't seen him. She didn't need to. "Hey," Rhett said to her specifically. Lena looked at him. Her grip on Claire's shirt loosened by 1 degree. "He's gone," Rhett said. She looked at him for a long moment with those dark, evaluating eyes, and he watched the evaluation happen, watched her run the specific internal calibration. Is this true? Can this be trusted? Is the person saying it the kind of person whose words hold weight in the world? And he watched it tip. She nodded. One small, precise nod. Claire had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were bright, and her breathing was uneven, and the professional composure had come completely apart at the seams, but she was standing, and she was standing between Lena and where the door had been, and that posture told its own story about what she was made of. Rhett looked at her. You okay? She removed her hand from her mouth. No, she said. And then immediately, yes. She shook her head at herself. I don't know what... You don't have to know right now, Rhett said. The corridor door opened and Hayes came through it at speed with a younger security officer behind him and the employee who'd run for help behind that. And Hayes took in the room in a single sweep. Rhett, Claire, Lena, the emergency exit, the general configuration of a situation that had occurred and was now in its aftermath, and his face went through several things quickly. What happened? He said. Man came through the emergency exit, Rhett said. He's gone. Went around the east side of the building. He paused. His name is Daniel Fitch. He has a documented history of domestic violence against the guardian of this child. There's a custody order. He's not supposed to have contact. He said it plainly, without drama, giving Hayes the operational information in the sequence that would let Hayes act on it fastest. He may still be on the property. He may have transportation nearby. Hayes was already on his radio. Rhett's phone buzzed. Hex, man on foot coming around the east corner. We're watching him. He texted back. Airport security is active. Let them handle it. Don't engage. A pause. Then Hex, copy. Then, 10 seconds later, he's running. Hayes's radio crackled. Somewhere outside on the perimeter road, a man in a wet jacket was running in the snow, and the specific geography of a fenced airport property on a winter night in a blizzard was not generous to people running from things. Rhett put his phone in his pocket. He looked at Lena. She was still standing with her hand loosely holding the back of Claire's shirt, and she was looking at him with an expression that he had not seen on her face in the hours they'd occupied this terminal together. Not the evaluation, not the careful wariness, not the precise assessment of threat or safety. Something else. Something that had come through the other side of fear and arrived at a place that was quieter and less guarded, the specific expression of a person who has witnessed something that has confirmed a thing they had been trying to decide whether to believe. You stayed, she said. Third time tonight. But it meant something different each time. His throat did something he didn't expect it to do. He managed his face, which was a skill he had, and he said, "Yeah, kid." Even when... She stopped. Her eyes went to the emergency exit and back. Even when it got bad. Especially then, Rhett said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she let go of Claire's shirt, walked across the room, and put her arms around him. Around as much of him as her small arms could reach, which was not a large portion of him, but the portion it reached was specific and deliberate and carried the full weight of everything the night had been. He put one hand on the back of her head, very gently. He stood there with the child's arms around him, and the terminal humming its amber night frequency around them and the storm going white and relentless against the walls. And Hayes's radio crackled again, and somewhere outside in the snow and the dark, 3 Harley engines idled in the service lane like something patient and permanent. And the night held all of it, the fear and the exhaustion and the choice and the cost of the choice. And somewhere on the perimeter road of a fenced airport, a man was running out of places to go. Rhett stood very still and breathed and kept watch. Outside, the engines idled. Inside, for the first time all night, the room was safe. Daniel Fitch was apprehended at the east perimeter fence at 12:19 in the morning by 2 Richmond Airport security officers and a responding police unit that Hayes had called the moment Rhett gave him the name. He was on the ground in the snow with his hands behind his back before the second officer had finished climbing out of the cruiser, and the specific image of it, a man who had spent years making himself the largest threat in every room he entered, face down in a blizzard on the wrong side of a fence, contained a justice that had no drama in it, no ceremony, just the flat and final fact of a thing being over. Rhett heard it from Hayes, who told him at 12:30 with the particular expression of a man revising an assessment he should have made earlier in the evening. Hayes didn't say he was sorry. He said, "The officers are going to need a statement from Ms. Holloway in the morning." And Rhett said, "She'll be ready." And they looked at each other for a moment with the specific understanding of two men who had occupied the same space all night from different sides of a line and had arrived by different routes at the same destination. "You were right to stay with her," Hayes said. It cost him something to say it. Rhett accepted it without making it larger than it was. "You were doing your job," Rhett said. "Both things can be true." Hayes nodded, a single motion, and walked away. At 5:40 in the morning, May Holloway came through the terminal doors. She was 71, small, with white hair, and the specific bearing of a woman who had driven on iced roads through a Virginia winter to get to her granddaughter and had not considered any alternative. She found Claire and Lena in the family services room, and what happened between the three of them in the first 30 seconds was not for outside eyes, and Rhett gave it the privacy it deserved by staying in the corridor. Through the glass panel, he watched May hold Lena the way grandmothers held children, with the whole body, with the specific completeness of a person for whom this child was the most important thing on earth, and who was not embarrassed by that. He watched Claire's composure, which had been reconstructed sometime around 3 in the morning and had held since, come apart quietly in May's free arm, and he watched May hold them both, this small white-haired woman holding two people who needed holding, and he looked away, toward the terminal windows where the snow had finally stopped, and the first gray of early morning was pressing through the glass. He went and got coffee. 3 cups, for himself, for Hex, who was still in the parking structure with his brothers, because somebody had to tell them they could go home. He brought the cups out through the main terminal doors into the cold early air. The storm was done. The sky had that specific post-storm quality, washed clean, the gray of it lighter than it had been, the first pale light beginning to separate the horizon from the dark. The service road was empty. The snow on the tarmac was unmarked and even, covering everything that had happened in the night under 4 clean inches of white. Hex was leaning against his bike in the east parking structure, his brothers on either side of him, all 3 of them in the specific posture of men who had been cold and waiting for a long time and had made their peace with it. They looked up when Rhett came through. He handed the coffee over without ceremony. Hex took it, looked at him over the rim. "She okay?" "Yeah," Rhett said. "She's okay." Hex nodded. He drank his coffee and looked at the pale sky. One of the brothers, a man named Cord, who was 40-something and didn't say much, put his hand briefly on Rhett's shoulder and took it away. And that was the whole of the conversation about what the night had been, and what it had cost, and what it had meant. It was enough. When Rhett went back inside, Lena was standing in the corridor outside the family services room with her backpack on and the horsebook under her arm, and she looked up at him with the clear, direct eyes that had been evaluating him all night and were now doing something different. Not evaluating, not measuring, just seeing. "May cried," she said. "Yeah?" "She never cries." A pause. "I think I scared her." "You scared everyone," Rhett said. "You scared me." She looked at him for a moment, processing that, filing it in the specific way she filed everything. "You don't seem like someone who scares easy." "I don't scare easy," he said. "But I scare." She nodded, accepting this as the honest accounting it was. Then she reached into her backpack and produced a small folded piece of paper. Airport notepad paper, the kind from the desk in the family services room, and held it out to him. He took it, unfolded it, in careful, deliberate 8-year-old handwriting. "Thank you for staying. Lena H." He stood with it in his hands for a moment. "Keep it," she said. "So you remember." He folded it back along its crease and put it in the inside pocket of his vest, against his chest, where it sat with the specific weight of something that would stay there a long time. Claire found him at the gate, 20 minutes before boarding, when the Nashville flight had finally been cleared and the departure board had gone from delayed to on time, with the slightly miraculous quality of things that happen after long waiting. She sat down beside him without preamble, and they sat in the early morning light coming through the terminal windows. the clean gray gold light of a winter morning after a storm, when the world looked like it had been reset, like the previous night's events were both completely real and somehow sealed in a category of their own. "Fitch will have a lawyer by noon," she said. "He will," Rhett said. "It won't be 60 days this time," she said. "Breaking and entering a secured facility, prior record, documented violation of the custody order." She said it the way she'd said the clinical things the night before, with the composure that was not coldness, but was the thing you built over coldness to function. "The DA in Charlottesville has been waiting for another incident." "Good," Rhett said. She looked at her hands, then at him. "What about your situation? Nashville." "I'll handle it," he said. "Will you be okay?" He thought about Cage's voice on the phone at midnight, the genuine surprise, the hardening into action, the sentence about men who put children in the middle. He thought about Drummer's hand on his shoulder, and the story about Katie in the parking garage, and the 11 minutes, and the woman whose name was never known. He thought about the 48 hours, and Virgo, and the 40 corridor, and all the machinery of the life he was going back to on the first flight out of a storm. "Yeah," he said. She looked at him steadily. "That's the same answer you gave me last night." "Same answer," he said.
Still true. She almost smiled. The same almost smile as her niece, the one that lived in the neighborhood of the expression without quite arriving. He recognized it now as a family trait, something that had survived everything the family had been through, carried in the specific geometry of a smile not quite happening on two different faces. The boarding call came over the PA. Rhett stood, picked up his bag. Claire stood too. She looked at him with everything the night had been in her eyes, all of it. The courthouse 12 years ago, the terminal, the amber running lights, the push-bar handle, May's crying, Lena's note, compressed into the specific look of a person who has no adequate language for a thing and knows it. "Second time," she said. "Don't make it a habit," he said. "I won't always be in the same airport." She laughed. A short, real sound, the first full laugh he'd heard from her, and it landed in the terminal morning like something that had been waiting to exist. He walked toward the gate. He was almost through when he heard her say, quietly, behind him, not calling after him, not performing it, just saying it into the space between them. "Rhett." He looked back. She was standing in the terminal light, and Lena was beside her now, appeared from somewhere, standing with her backpack and her book and her hand in Claire's hand, and they were looking at him, so the woman and the child, together, in the specific configuration of two people who were going to be all right, who had decided to be all right, who had been given a night that should have broken them and had come through it with the specific fierce wholeness of people who had chosen each other and meant it. He raised one hand, a single, simple gesture, not a wave, an acknowledgement. Then he went through the gate. The Nashville flight lifted out of Richmond at 6:52 in the morning, climbing through the last of the storm's remnants into clear air above the clouds, and below him the world was white and clean and still. The highway systems visible as dark threads through the snow, the cities small and exact in the morning light. Somewhere on those highways, 3 Harleys were already riding west. Somewhere in a terminal coffee shop, a woman in nurse's scrubs was buying hot chocolate for a small girl with a horse book. Somewhere in Nashville, a conversation was waiting that was going to be difficult and necessary and not without cost. And Rhett Callow was going to walk into that room the same way he'd walked into the terminal the night before, without pretense, without performance, without apology for what he was or what he'd chosen. He looked out the window at the clouds. In the inside pocket of his vest, against the left side of his chest, a folded piece of notepad paper said, "Thank you for staying." He put his hand over it once, briefly, through the leather. Then he leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Below him, the world kept moving. The storm was over. The highway ran on. And somewhere in the middle distance, faint and then fainter and then gone, the sound of engines carried west into the clean morning air. And it was not a lonely sound. It was the sound of men who knew what they were, riding toward the next thing, carrying everything they'd always carried, the weight and the code and the quiet, unannounced, permanent commitment to stop when stopping mattered, even when no one was watching, especially then.